Johnny Ray Miller was only 18 years old when he was killed, but he was already living a life full of adult responsibilities. Born and raised in the small city Bowling Green, Kentucky, Johnny Ray was known for his bright smile, easygoing nature, and dedication to his family. Just days graduating from Warren Central High School, he married his pregnant high school sweetheart, Millie Thornton, and quickly took on the role of a husband and father. A former high school swimming star, Johnny Ray worked as a mechanic at the local Jiffy Lube, spending his days changing oil, rotating tires, and fixing engines. His co-workers liked him for his positive attitude and willingness to help out, even when the shop was busy. Johnny Ray's love for his family was evident to everyone who knew him. He adored his 16-month-old son, Royal, and was often seen pushing him in a stroller through the aisles of the local Walmart. Johnny Ray had big dreams for his family, even if money was tight. He had been talking about taking Millie and Royal to the Smoky Mountains for a vacation, where they could relax and enjoy the great outdoors. But behind the happy pictures on social media, there were struggles that not everyone saw. Johnny Ray was balancing a lot for someone his age, working long hours to support his family while trying to stay involved in the lives of his young wife and son. Despite his commitments, Johnny Ray sometimes found himself in trouble. He had a weakness for other women, which often caused tension between him and Millie. This tension grew when Millie's father, Dr. Alan Thornton, whose house the couple lived in, began spending more time around the couple. Alan was a respected urologist in town, but he had developed an unhealthy sexual obsession with his son-in-law. Johnny Ray didn't realize the danger he was in, thinking the older man's attention was just a father-in-law's concern. In May of 2018, Johnny Ray's life was tragically cut short. Just days before his death, he had shared a post on Facebook about how excited he was for the future, looking forward to the summer with his family. But that future was stolen from him, leaving behind a young wife, a toddler son, and a town in shock over the brutal crime that would soon come to light. On the morning of May 14, 2018, Bowling Green was just waking up when a horrific discovery shattered the quiet neighborhood on College Street. It was around 7:30 a.m. when Millie Thornton, Johnny Ray's young wife, stepped into the garage of her father's large, two-story home. She had been worried since Johnny Ray hadn't come to bed the night before. She thought he might have fallen asleep working on the old Chevy truck he'd been fixing up, a project he'd been excited about for weeks. What Millie found instead would haunt her for the rest of her life. Johnny Ray's lifeless body lay crumpled on the cold concrete floor. All his clothes, except for his underwear, were torn, almost ripped off, and there was blood everywhere. The sight of her husband, the father of her child and love of her life, battered and broken, sent Millie into a state of shock. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Millie screamed, her cries echoing through the garage and into the quiet morning air. Panicked and terrified, she grabbed her phone and called 911, her hands shaking so badly that she could barely dial the number. When the 911 operator answered, Millie could hardly speak. She managed to choke out the words, "My husband. There's blood everywhere." The operator, sensing the urgency, dispatched emergency responders immediately. Millie, in tears, backed out of the garage, unable to look at Johnny Ray's body any longer. She waited on the front lawn, her face pale and her whole body trembling, as she watched the minutes tick by, each one feeling like an eternity. Within minutes, police officers arrived at the scene, followed closely by paramedics, or greeted by the gruesome sight of Johnny Ray's body. Trying to hold back tears. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air as Boulder police arrived on the scene. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, drawn by the flashing lights, but Jason couldn't bring himself to look at anyone. His world had just been shattered, and all he could do was wait for the nightmare to unfold further. The Boulder police arrived quickly at Paul Barstow's home on the night of June 5, 2017. The flashing lights and sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood, alerting nearby residents that something terrible had happened. Detective Laura Reynolds, a seasoned investigator with 15 years of experience, was the first on the scene. Known for her no-nonsense approach and sharp instincts, Reynolds immediately sensed that this was no ordinary death. As she entered the house, Reynolds took in the disarray. The living room looked like it had been the site of a struggle. An overturned chair, scattered papers, and a shattered coffee mug painted a picture of chaos. But it was the scene in the bedroom that confirmed her worst fears. Paul Barstow lay on the floor, a length of rope still tightly wound around his neck. His face was pale, his eyes lifeless. The sight was disturbing, even for someone as experienced as Reynolds. The crime scene team quickly set to work, photographing the room from every angle and collecting potential evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took samples from the rope, and carefully bagged the shattered pieces of the coffee mug. Reynolds noticed the position of Paul's body. His hands bore defensive wounds, and there were signs of bruising around his neck and face. To her, this clearly pointed to a violent struggle, suggesting that Paul had fought for his life. However, not everyone on the team was convinced. As the investigation progressed, a controversy began to brew. Some forensic experts argued that the scene could be interpreted differently. Dr. Matilda Chiang, a forensic pathologist with a reputation for thoroughness, suggested that the evidence might point to a suicide rather than a murder. She noted that the rope had been tied in a way that could be self-inflicted, and the disarray in the living room could have been caused by Paul in a distressed state. According to Dr. Chiang, it wasn't uncommon for people in deep emotional turmoil to stage scenes before taking their own lives. This conflict between several different experts created tension within the investigation. On one side, Detective Reynolds and her team were convinced that Paul had been murdered, possibly during a violent struggle. On the other side, Dr. Chiang and her supporters argued for a more nuanced interpretation, one that considered the possibility of suicide. The disagreement slowed the investigation, as the team was forced to consider both possibilities, examining every piece of evidence from multiple angles. As the days passed, the pressure on the Boulder Police Department grew. The media caught wind of the conflicting theories, with local outlets like the Denver Post, a newspaper renowned for its hard-hitting investigations, running stories that questioned whether the police were pursuing the right leads. The controversy only added to the anguish of Paul's family, who were desperate for answers. They wanted to know what had really happened to the man they loved, and they demanded that the police uncover the truth, whether it pointed to murder or suicide. Angelica Barstow, Paul's sister-in-law, quickly became the first person of interest in the investigation. At 34, Angelica was known in Boulder for her quirky personality. She ran a YouTube channel with almost 100,000 subscribers called Fairy Works, where she posted videos about her interactions with fairies and other spiritual beings. The channel had gained quite a lot of attention, including from newspapers and some online outlets, but mostly for the wrong reasons. Viewers attacked her by the thousands, leaking hateful comments saying everything she was talking about was fake and that she was a liar. And by June 2017, the negativity had begun to take its toll on Angelica's mental health. Angelica's marriage to Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother, had been rocky. Millie spoke softly, her voice trembling as she recounted how they had argued the night before Johnny Ray's death. She was clearly devastated by his murder, but the detectives needed to dig deeper. Billy explained that she had gone to bed alone, assuming Johnny Ray was busy with his project in the garage. When she woke up and found him missing, she panicked and went to look for him, leading to her horrific discovery. The detectives observed Millie closely as she spoke, noting her pale face and trembling hands. Her grief seemed genuine, but they couldn't rule out the possibility that she could be hiding something. The pressure of being a young mother, combined with Johnny Ray's known infidelities, could have driven her to a breaking point. The police continued to press Millie, asking her where she had been during the hours Johnny Ray was killed. Millie insisted that she had been home all night, asleep with her son. She couldn't think of anyone who would want to harm Johnny Ray, but her growing insecurity about their marriage had been evident to her close friends. Millie's responses were calm but filled with sorrow. She repeatedly expressed her disbelief that anyone could hurt Johnny Ray, much less kill him. Despite Millie's apparent innocence, the detectives remained cautious. They needed to explore every angle, and Millie's proximity to the crime made her a key figure in their investigation. As they moved on to other potential suspects, they kept Millie on their list, knowing that in murder cases, even those closest to the victim can have secrets. As the investigation into Johnny Ray Miller's murder continued, the police shifted their focus to Dr. Alan Thornton, Johnny Ray's father-in-law. Dr. Thornton, 52, was a well-known urologist in Bowling Green, Kentucky, with a reputation as a respected and successful medical professional. On the surface, he appeared to be a pillar of the community, dedicated to his practice, involved in local charities, and well-liked by his patients. However, behind closed doors, Alan Thornton was a man with dark and twisted secrets. Johnny Ray had been married to Dr. Thornton's daughter, Millie Thornton, for just over a year, and while Dr. Thornton publicly supported the young couple by letting them and their son live in his house, he harbored a disturbing sexual obsession with his son-in-law. This obsession had begun innocuously enough, with Dr. Thornton accidentally walking in on Johnny Ray in the bathroom and offering to buy him clothes. But over time, his feelings had evolved into something far more dangerous. An overwhelmingly intense and unhealthy sexual obsession. Alan's feelings were conflicted. He was jealous of Johnny Ray's relationship with his daughter Millie and simultaneously desired Johnny Ray in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. The police became even more suspicious of Dr. Thornton when they learned about his past. His wife, Carol Thornton, had died in a boating accident years earlier under circumstances that some in the community found questionable. Although no evidence had ever pointed to foul play, the case had never quite sat right with some of the locals. Now, with Johnny Ray's murder, the police wondered if Alan Thornton could be responsible for yet another suspicious death within his family. When the police brought Dr. Thornton in for questioning, he appeared calm and composed, traits expected of a seasoned medical professional. He answered their questions with measured responses, carefully choosing his words. The detectives asked about his relationship with Johnny Ray, and Alan described it as amicable, though he admitted they had their differences. He claimed to have been home the night of the murder, watching television and preparing for an early morning surgery the next day. He even mentioned that he had been binge-watching the feminist allegory The Handmaid's Tale on Hulu, trying to appear as ordinary as possible. However, the detectives noticed something off in Dr. Thornton's demeanor, an underlying tension that suggested he was hiding something. When they pressed him further about whether he had sexual feelings for Johnny Ray, he became slightly defensive, insisting that he had no interest in his son-in-law. He dismissed any suggestion of jealousy or inappropriate feelings, stating that he only wanted what was best for Millie and her new family. Despite his outward calm, Dr. Thornton's answers raised red flags for the investigators. They knew that his successful career and community standing would make it difficult to prove any involvement in Johnny Ray's death without solid evidence. Still, they couldn't ignore the unsettling feeling that Alan Thornton was not being entirely truthful. As they continued their investigation, they kept a close watch on Dr. Thornton, aware that his dark obsession could have been the driving force behind the brutal murder. The investigation into Johnny Ray Miller's murder led the police to a third suspect, Savannah Lee, a 33-year-old stripper who worked at a local gentleman's club called Wild Girls in Bowling Green. Savannah was known for her fiery personality and independence, traits that had drawn Johnny Ray to her in the first place. Their relationship had begun several months before his death, and it was anything but simple. Savannah was captivated by Johnny Ray's youth and charm, seeing in him an escape from her current life. Savannah had a tough exterior, but those who knew her understood that beneath her confidence was a woman desperate for a better future. She had been working at the club for years, entertaining men from all walks of life, but she dreamed of a life far removed from the seedy underworld of adult entertainment. When Johnny Ray came into her life, she believed she had found a way out. Their affair was intense and passionate, filled with quick late-night sex and fast food drive-through and whispered promises. However, as time passed, Savannah grew increasingly frustrated with Johnny Ray's reluctance to leave Millie and their young son. She wanted more than just stolen moments. She wanted a future with him. When the police brought Savannah in for questioning, they found a woman who was both defiant and scared. She wore a tight black leather jacket, ripped jeans, and red lipstick that made her stand out in the small interrogation room. Savannah wasn't one to back down easily, and she met the detectives' questions with a mix of sass and suspicion. She admitted to having an affair with Johnny Ray but denied any involvement in his murder. "I banged him like there was nothing left to lose," she insisted, her voice cracking slightly, though she quickly regained her composure. She claimed that she had been at work the night Johnny Ray was killed, providing an alibi that seemed credible on the surface. Despite her tough demeanor, Savannah's eyes betrayed her anxiety. The detectives pressed her on her relationship with Johnny Ray, asking if she had ever threatened him or his family. Savannah scoffed at the idea, but her frustration was palpable. She resented Millie, not because she disliked her personally, but because Millie stood in the way of what she wanted, a life with Johnny Ray. The detectives noted her anger, but couldn't find any solid evidence linking her to the crime. Still, Savannah remained on their radar, a woman whose desire for a better life might have driven her to desperation. As the investigation continued, the police knew they couldn't rule her out just yet. As the investigation into Johnny Ray Miller's murder entered its third week, the Bowling Green Police Department was at a standstill. Despite interrogating several suspects, including Johnny Ray's wife, Millie, his father-in-law, Dr. Alan Thornton, and his lover, Savannah Lee, the detectives hadn't found any solid evidence that pointed directly to the killer. The case seemed to be going cold, and the small Kentucky town was growing anxious for answers. Then, on a humid morning in late May 2018, a breakthrough came. Detective Samuel Branson, who had been poring over the details of the case, decided to revisit the crime scene one more time. He returned to Johnny Ray's garage, hoping to find something, anything, that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. The garage, a cluttered space filled with tools, car parts, and remnants of Johnny Ray's hobbies, had already been combed through multiple times, but Branson was determined not to leave any stone unturned. As he carefully examined the area around the workbench, something caught his eye. Tucked behind a pile of old newspapers was a small, nearly invisible digital recorder. It was a cheap, pocket-sized device, the kind you might pick up at a convenience store. Branson picked it up and immediately realized it could be crucial evidence. The recorder was dusty, as if it had been there for a while, and its battery was nearly dead, but it was intact. Back at the station, Branson and his team played the recording. What they heard sent chills down their spines. The recording captured the sounds of a heated argument between Johnny Ray and another man, whose voice was quickly identified as Dr. Alan Thornton's. The audio was muffled, but it was clear enough to make out several key phrases. Thornton could be telling Johnny Ray, "I want you. I want you in every part of me," and pleading for Johnny Ray to make me the happiest man on earth. The creepy conversation escalated, with Johnny Ray pleading to leave, but the recording abruptly ended before the fabled confrontation. The detectives knew they had found the smoking gun. The recording not only placed Dr. Thornton at the scene of the crime, but also suggested a motive driven by a twisted sense of jealousy and sexual desire. Armed with this new evidence, the police secured a warrant to search Dr. Thornton's home and office. There they discovered more incriminating evidence, including a series of anonymous letters sent to Millie, which they matched to Thornton's handwriting. These letters had been intended to drive a wedge between Johnny Ray and Millie by revealing Johnny Ray's affairs with women, further fueling the doctor's obsessive and dangerous sexual feelings toward his son-in-law. The discovery of the digital recorder was the turning point in the investigation. It gave the police the evidence they needed to move forward with the case and finally bring Johnny Ray's killer to justice. As they prepared to confront Dr. Thornton, they knew they were closing in on a man whose obsession had spiraled into murder. On May 28, 2018, the Bowling Green Police Department made their move. Armed with the digital recording that implicated Dr. Alan Thornton in Johnny Ray Miller's murder, they arrived at Thornton's upscale suburban home early in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet. The only sounds were the chirping of birds and the occasional bark of a distant dog. But inside the Thornton household, chaos was about to erupt. Dr. Thornton, 52, was a well-known and respected urologist in Bowling Green, Kentucky. To the public, he was the picture of professionalism, a devoted father and community leader. But the police have uncovered a darker side, revealing his unhealthy sexual obsession with his son-in-law, Johnny Ray. The evidence suggested that Thornton's jealousy and rage had driven him to commit the brutal murder, and now the time had come to bring him to justice. As the police knocked on the front door, Thornton answered, still dressed in his pajamas. He seemed calm at first, but that quickly changed when the officers informed him they had a warrant for his arrest. The color drained from his face, and he stumbled back, muttering, "This can't be happening." The officers moved swiftly, handcuffing him and reading him his rights as Millie and her son Royal looked on in shock from the hallway. The arrest was a significant moment for the detectives who had worked tirelessly on the case. Thornton was taken to the station, where he was formally charged with first-degree murder. During the interrogation, he initially tried to maintain his innocence, but the weight of the evidence against him was overwhelming. When confronted with the digital recording, his composure cracked. Thornton's face twisted with emotion as he listened to his own voice yearning for Johnny Ray, and he eventually broke down. He admitted that his sexual feelings for Johnny Ray had become uncontrollable. Thornton had been desirous of Johnny Ray's youth and charm, qualities he both desired and resented. When Johnny Ray's relationship with Millie showed signs of strain, Thornton saw an opportunity. He sent anonymous letters to Millie, hoping to sabotage their marriage and manipulate Johnny Ray into a more dependent sexual relationship. But when Johnny Ray refused Thornton's pleas for sex, the doctor's anger boiled over, leading to the violent confrontation in the garage. The news of Thornton's arrest spread quickly through Bowling Green. The Miller family, devastated by the loss of Johnny Ray, were both relieved and horrified by the revelation. Millie, who had loved and trusted her father, was shattered by the truth. As Thornton was taken away, she knew her life would never be the same. The once respected doctor had been unmasked as a murderer, and the town of Bowling Green would never forget the tragedy that unfolded in their midst. The trial of Dr. Alan Thornton began on November 5, 2018 in Warren County Circuit Court. The case had captured the attention of the entire community, with many in Bowling Green shocked by the revelations about the well-known doctor. The courtroom was packed as both the prosecution and defense presented their cases. The prosecution was led by Assistant District Attorney Laura Shepard, a seasoned prosecutor known for her tough, no-nonsense approach. Shepard, 44, laid out a compelling case against Dr. Thornton, emphasizing the premeditated nature of the crime. She argued that Thornton's jealousy and obsession with Johnny Ray Miller had driven him to commit murder. Shepard highlighted the anonymous letters sent to Millie and the digital recording as key pieces of evidence, showing that Thornton had meticulously planned to break up his daughter's marriage. She described Thornton as a man consumed by his twisted desires, ultimately leading him to kill the young father in a fit of rage. On the other side, the defense was handled by attorney Mark Preston, 50, a well-respected figure in Bowling Green's legal community, known for his calm demeanor. Preston argued that Thornton had acted in a moment of temporary insanity, claiming that the doctor's actions were the result of an emotional breakdown rather than a calculated plan. He suggested that Thornton's mental state had deteriorated, causing him to lose control. Preston tried to cast doubt on the prosecution's case by questioning the reliability of the digital recording and suggesting that Thornton's actions might have been influenced by stress rather than deliberate intent. Throughout the trial, Johnny Ray's family, including his wife Millie and their young son Royal, sat in the courtroom. They were visibly emotional as they listened to the details of Johnny Ray's murder. Millie, in particular, struggled to hold back tears as she heard about the extent of her father's betrayal. After several days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just under 4 hours before returning with a verdict. Dr. Alan Thornton was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with relief and sadness by Johnny Ray's family and friends. The judge sentenced Thornton to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would pay for the brutal crime. The trial had a profound effect on the Bowling Green community. It was a harsh reminder of how hidden obsessions and betrayals can lead to devastating consequences. For Johnny Ray's family, the verdict provided some measure of justice, but the loss of their loved one would remain a deep wound. In the aftermath of Dr. Alan Thornton's trial, life in Bowling Green slowly began to return to normal, though the impact of the case was deeply felt by everyone involved. Dr. Thornton, now serving a life sentence without parole at the Kentucky State Penitentiary, faced a life of isolation and regret. His once respected medical career was over, and he had become a pariah in his community. The prison environment was harsh, and Thornton struggled to adapt to the new reality of his life behind bars. He was placed in solitary confinement for his own protection, given the high-profile nature of his crime. His family remained supportive but faced their own struggles. The scandal had shattered their lives, leaving them to cope with the shame and isolation that came with Thornton's conviction. For Millie Thornton, the trial had been a devastating experience. As she tried to rebuild her life, she focused on caring for her young son, Royal, and finding some sense of normalcy. Millie continued to live in Bowling Green but found it difficult to escape the shadow of the tragedy that had unfolded. She was often seen in public with a somber expression, grappling with the dual burden of grief for her husband and betrayal by her father. Community support was crucial for Millie as she navigated her new reality. Friends and neighbors offered their condolences and practical help, though nothing could fully mend the emotional scars left by the murder. The Thornton case left a lasting mark on Bowling Green, a small town that had been rocked by the shocking events. While the community worked to heal, the story of Johnny Ray Miller and the betrayal by someone so close to him remained a poignant reminder of the dark side of human nature. Today, we unravel the tragic and twisted tale of Jacob Rasmussen, a young man whose life was cut short in the opulent city of Naples, Florida, in August 2016. Jacob Rasmussen was a 20-year-old massage therapist living in Naples, Florida. Originally from a small town in Minnesota, Jacob had moved to Naples seeking better opportunities and a warmer climate. He was known for his good looks, athletic build, and charming personality, which quickly made him popular among his clients, especially of older women. Jacob had a knack for making people feel special, which helped him build a loyal client base. Jacob's charm and good looks also brought him into the world of sugar babies, where younger people enter into sexual relationships with older, wealthier individuals in exchange for gifts and financial support. Jacob had several sugar mommies, but his primary one was Veronica Hayes, a 59-year-old astrologist. While Jacob enjoyed the benefits of these relationships, they also inevitably brought complications and tensions. In the days leading up to his death, Jacob was excited about his future. He had recently received a generous gift from one of his clients, an Audi SUV, which he proudly showed off to his friends. He was also planning a trip to Disney World with some of his friends, something he had been looking forward to for months. Jacob's Instagram was filled with posts about his plans, from pictures of his new car to countdowns to his Disney trip. Despite these complexities, Jacob remained optimistic and full of life. He was known for his infectious smile and positive attitude. Friends and clients alike admired his ambition and drive. Jacob's life, filled with dreams and plans, would be cut short, though, in a tragic and shocking way. On the morning of August 12, 2016, Jacob Rasmussen's neighbor, Linda Martino, started her day like any other. Linda was a 95-year-old retired school teacher from Brooklyn who lived next door to Jacob in their Naples, Florida apartment complex. She often chatted with Jacob and had become concerned when she noticed his car, a shiny new Audi SUV, hadn't moved in 2 weeks. Linda thought it was odd because Jacob usually had a busy schedule. Around 9 a.m., Linda decided to check on Jacob. She knocked on his door but got no answer. Worried, she used the spare key Jacob had given her for emergencies. As soon as she opened the door, she felt something was wrong. The apartment was too quiet, and a faint, unpleasant smell filled the air. Linda called out Jacob's name, but there was no response. She walked through the living room and into the hallway. When she reached the bathroom, she saw a horrifying sight. Jacob was lying face down in the toilet, naked. His head was submerged in the water, and his body was limp. Linda screamed and backed away, her heart racing. Shaking, Linda ran back to her apartment and called 911. Her voice trembled as she explained what she had found. "I think my neighbor is dead," she told the operator. "He's in his bathroom, and it looks like something happened to him." The 911 operator stayed on the line with Linda, trying to keep her calm until the police arrived. Linda was in shock, pacing back and forth in her apartment and glancing nervously at Jacob's door. She couldn't believe what she had seen. Just a few days ago, Jacob had been full of life, talking about his plans to visit Disney World and showing off his new car. Within minutes, the Naples Police Department arrived at the scene. Officers secured the area and began their investigation. Linda was asked to wait outside while the police did their work. She sat on a bench, shaking and holding her head in her hands, trying to process the tragic event. News of Jacob's death quickly spread through the apartment complex. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering and speculating about what had happened. The local news soon picked up the story, with reporters arriving to cover the shocking discovery. Cameras captured the scene, showing the police presence and the concerned faces of the residents. Jacob's sudden and violent death left everyone in shock, especially those who knew him well. He was young, full of potential, and had a bright future ahead. Now his life was tragically cut short, and his friends and family were left to mourn the loss. The Naples Police Department arrived quickly at the scene after Linda Martino's 911 call on August 12, 2016. Detective Samuel Jenkins led the investigation. He was known for his attention to detail and had solved many high-profile cases. His partner, Officer Karen Blake, was known for her sharp intuition and calm demeanor. As they entered Jacob Rasmussen's apartment, the officers immediately noticed the eerie silence. The living room was tidy, with no signs of a struggle. A flat-screen TV was on the wall, and a few magazines, including the latest issue of GQ, were on the coffee table. The apartment looked normal, but the unsettling smell hinted at something more sinister. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake moved cautiously toward the bathroom, where Jacob's body was found. The bathroom was small, with white tiles and a modern shower. Jacob's naked body was slumped over the toilet, his head submerged in the water. There were no visible signs of a break-in, and nothing seemed out of place, but the scene was disturbing. Jacob had been drowned. His head had been forced into the toilet, and there were bruises on his arms and neck, indicating a struggle. Detective Jenkins noted the position of the body and the bruising pattern, suggesting that Jacob had fought back against his attacker. The bathroom itself was clean, with no blood or other obvious evidence. The police began their methodical investigation. They took photographs of the entire apartment, collected fingerprints, and searched for any possible clues. They found a set of kitchen knives, but none appeared to be missing. Officer Blake found Jacob's phone on the kitchen counter. It was a new model, an iPhone 6S, and it might hold valuable information. She carefully bagged it for further analysis. Detective Jenkins and his team interviewed neighbors, including Linda Martino, to gather more information about Jacob's recent activities and any potential visitors. Linda mentioned seeing a few of Jacob's clients come and go, but nothing seemed unusual. She also noted the new Audi SUV Jacob had received recently. The forensic team arrived and began their examination of the body and the apartment. They used luminol to check for traces of blood, even in areas that appeared clean. They also checked for hair, fibers, and other small pieces of evidence that might have been left behind by the attacker. As the investigation progressed, the police began to piece together a timeline of Jacob's last hours. They hoped that his phone and the security cameras in the apartment complex might provide additional clues. The clean state of the apartment and the lack of obvious evidence suggested that the killer had taken great care to cover their tracks. The tragic scene at Jacob's apartment marked the beginning of a complex investigation. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake knew they had a difficult case ahead of them. They were determined to find out who was responsible for the young man's untimely death and bring them to justice. The first suspect in the investigation was Veronica Hayes, a 59-year-old astrologist. Veronica was well known in Naples for her larger-than-life personality and her impressive client list, which included several celebrities. She lived in a lavish mansion decorated with exotic crystals and zodiac signs. Veronica had a reputation for being generous, often gifting expensive items to her friends and clients. However, she was also known to be possessive and obsessive, especially in her personal relationships. It was no secret Veronica had been in a sexual relationship with Jacob Rasmussen, acting as his sugar mommy. She showered him with gifts, including the 70-inch flat-screen TV found in his house. When the police first questioned Veronica, she was calm but visibly upset. She admitted to being deeply hurt when she discovered that Jacob had been seeing other women. Despite her feelings, she denied any involvement in his death. Detective Samuel Jenkins and Officer Karen Blake conducted the interrogation. They were careful and thorough, asking Veronica about her whereabouts on the night of the murder. Veronica claimed, like a typical Virgo, she was at home, alone, reading the latest issue of Astrology Today and meditating. She insisted she had not seen Jacob for several days before his death and respected his need for privacy as a Scorpio. The police dug deeper into Veronica's background. They found that she had a history of intense relationships, including 3 failed marriages, that often ended badly, something she readily admitted to, saying she couldn't help it as someone with their moon in Cancer. Former friends and clients described her as charming but controlling. Several mentioned that Veronica Cancer moon could make her very jealous, especially when she felt betrayed. This gave the police a possible motive for her to harm Jacob. During the interrogation, Veronica's demeanor shifted. She became more defensive and agitated, particularly when asked about her relationship with Jacob. She accused the police of unfairly targeting her because of her wealth, high-profile lifestyle, and belief in astrology. Despite her protests, the police continued to press her for details. The police also examined Veronica's phone records. They found multiple calls and text messages to Jacob in the days leading up to his death. Some of the messages were affectionate, while others were increasingly profane, vicious, desperate, and accusatory. This evidence painted a picture of a relationship that was unraveling, with Veronica struggling to maintain control. Despite the mounting evidence and Veronica's increasingly erratic behavior, there was no direct proof linking her to the crime scene. The police needed more concrete evidence to make an arrest. As the investigation continued, Veronica remained a key suspect, her actions and history keeping her under close scrutiny. The second suspect the police investigated was Bryony Mitchell Keynes, a 68-year-old Australian millionaire with quite the shocking backstory. Bryony had recently moved to Naples after facing legal trouble in Australia after a newspaper published allegations showing Bryony allegedly trafficking asylum seekers to work in her restaurant's chain for, quote, subhuman wages. Known for her outgoing and vivacious personality, Bryony was also fiercely protective of her friends and had a temper that could flare up unexpectedly. Bryony had started a sexual relationship with Jacob Rasmussen shortly before his death. As another of his sugar mommies, she was generous, giving him expensive gifts, including the Audi SUV he received just before he died. When the police questioned Bryony, she was cooperative but guarded. She acknowledged her relationship with Jacob and expressed shock of his death. Detective Samuel Jenkins and Officer Karen Blake led the interrogation. They asked Bryony about her activities on the night Jacob was killed. Bryony stated she had been at Naked Masquerade Ball at the Naples Grande Beach Resort, mingling with other wealthy attendees and enjoying the evening. She provided the names of several people who could confirm her alibi, including local business owners and socialites. During the interrogation, Bryony remained composed, but her demeanor shifted when asked about Jacob's other relationships. She seemed irritated and defensive, insisting she had no idea about his involvement with other women. The police found her reaction suspicious, as it hinted at possible jealousy and a motive for harming Jacob. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake searched Bryony's home for any evidence linking her to the crime. They found several expensive gifts she had planned to give Jacob, including a jet ski, an air hockey table, and a PlayStation 4, indicating her deep investment in their relationship. In addition, they saw several large withdrawals from her bank account in the weeks leading up to Jacob's death. While this alone was not incriminating, it suggested she was heavily involved in Jacob's life and willing to spend significant amounts of money on him. They also discovered a series of text messages between Bryony and Jacob. The messages started flirty but became more intense, with Bryony expressing frustration over Jacob's lack of commitment. Despite Bryony's cooperation and strong alibi, the police remained suspicious of her involvement. Her intense feelings for Jacob and possible jealousy provided a motive, but like with Veronica Hayes, there was no direct evidence linking her to the murder. As the investigation continued, Bryony's actions and connections to Jacob kept her under close watch by the authorities. The third suspect in the investigation was Marcus Dean, a 21-year-old who had been in a rivalry with Jacob Rasmussen. Marcus was known in Naples for being competitive and ambitious. He was also a sugar baby, catering to wealthy, married couples bored with their humdrum sex life. Marcus was driven to be the best in his circle, always striving to outdo his peers in sexual performance and number of sugar parents. His personality was described as hot-headed, and he had a history of getting into arguments and fights, often fueled by alcohol. The police questioned Marcus shortly after Jacob's body was found. Detective Samuel Jenkins and Officer Karen Blake led the interrogation, focusing on the nature of Marcus and Jacob's relationship. Marcus admitted that he and Jacob had been rivals, both vying for the attention and gifts of the same wealthy women. He described their relationship as tense but insisted it was all part of the competition. On the night of Jacob's death, Marcus claimed he was at a local bar, Patty Murphy's, with friends, celebrating a recent orgy request with some wealthy couples. He provided the names of his friends who could confirm his alibi. However, Marcus's reputation for getting into fights after drinking raised suspicions about his possible involvement in Jacob's death. The police dug into Marcus's background, finding numerous reports of altercations with other sugar babies and clients. Many described Marcus as aggressive and quick to anger, especially when he felt threatened or disrespected. This temperament, combined with his rivalry with Jacob, gave the police a potential motive for murder. During the interrogation, Marcus initially remained calm, but became defensive when asked about his whereabouts and relationship with Jacob. He denied any involvement in Jacob's death and accused the police of trying to pin the crime on him due to their rivalry. His agitation grew as the questioning continued, suggesting he was hiding something. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake searched Marcus's apartment for evidence. They found a few items linking him to Jacob, including a gold chain that Jacob had posted about on social media, saying it was a gift from a client. The police also discovered a series of text messages between Marcus and Jacob. The messages revealed escalating tensions, with Marcus accusing Jacob of stealing his clients and threatening to teach that bleep a bleeping lesson. The police also reviewed security footage from Patty Murphy's on the night of Jacob's death. The footage confirmed Marcus's presence at the bar, but there was a 2-hour gap where Marcus was unaccounted for. This window of time raised further suspicion, as it was enough time for him to commit the crime and return to the bar. Despite the mounting evidence and Marcus's suspicious behavior, there was still no direct proof linking him to Jacob's murder. The police continued to keep Marcus under close watch, hoping to uncover more information that could either confirm or clear their suspicions. On August 18, 2016, 6 days after Jacob Rasmussen's body was found, the Naples Police Department received a breakthrough. The day was hot and sunny, with temperatures soaring into the mid-90s. Detective Samuel Jenkins and Officer Karen Blake were in the police station when they received a call from a local pawn shop owner who had found something unusual while inventorying recently pawned items. He told the police that a gold bracelet, inscribed with the initials JAR, had been pawned 2 days before Jacob's death. Jacob had posted a picture of this same bracelet on his social media, saying it was a gift from a client. The police immediately headed to the pawn shop, located on 5th Avenue South, a busy area filled with shops and restaurants. At the pawn shop, records showed that the bracelet had been pawned by Marcus Dean. This new evidence placed Marcus at the center of the investigation once again. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake were determined to dig deeper. The police brought Marcus back in for questioning. This time, they confronted him with the evidence of the bracelet. Marcus's demeanor shifted from defensive to visibly nervous. He stumbled over his words as he tried to explain why he had the bracelet. Marcus claimed that Jacob had given it to him as a gift, but the police were skeptical given their contentious history. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake also reviewed security footage from the pawn shop. The footage clearly showed Marcus entering the shop and pawning the bracelet. The timestamp on the video matched the date on the transaction records, leaving little doubt about Marcus's actions. The police used this footage to challenge Marcus's story further. The police also re-examined the security footage from Patty Murphy's bar on the night of Jacob's death. They discovered that Marcus had left the bar for 2 hours, providing him with enough time to commit the crime. This new evidence painted a clearer picture of Marcus's possible involvement in Jacob's murder. With the bracelet, the threatening text messages, and the suspicious gap in Marcus's alibi, the police felt they had enough to proceed. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake presented their findings to the district attorney, who agreed that the evidence was compelling. The police were now focused on gathering more information to strengthen their case against Marcus. They continued to interview witnesses and piece together the events leading up to Jacob's death, determined to bring justice for the young man whose life was tragically cut short. On August 22, 2016, the Naples Police Department made a breakthrough in Jacob Rasmussen's murder case. Detective Samuel Jenkins and Officer Karen Blake had gathered enough evidence to identify the murderer, Veronica Hayes. Veronica, a 59-year-old astrologist, was known for her extravagant lifestyle and powerful personality. Despite her public charm, she had a dark, obsessive side, especially in her relationships. The investigation revealed that Veronica's obsession with Jacob had grown dangerously intense. She was furious when she discovered that Jacob was seeing other older women for sex and receiving expensive gifts from them, including the Audi SUV from Brian E. Mitchell Keynes. Veronica's jealousy and anger boiled over on the night of August 1, 2016. On that night, Veronica confronted Jacob at his apartment about his new car. An argument erupted, and in a fit of rage, Veronica drowned Jacob in his own toilet. She forced his head into the water until he stopped struggling, leaving bruises on his arms and neck. To humiliate him further and make it look like he drowned himself, she stripped off his clothes, making the scene appear even more degrading. Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake pieced together the events through witness statements, security footage, and forensic evidence. Veronica's alibi, which claimed she was home reading astrology today and meditating, fell apart when phone records showed she was near Jacob's apartment at the time of the murder. Furthermore, forensic analysis of Veronica's clothing revealed traces of Jacob's blood, linking her directly to the crime scene. On the morning of August 22, the police moved in to arrest Veronica. They arrived at her mansion, a grand estate adorned with astrological symbols and crystals. Veronica was taken by surprise, her confident demeanor cracking as she was handcuffed and led to the police car. She protested loudly, accusing the police of targeting her because of her wealth and status. The arrest sent shockwaves through the Naples community. Jacob's family, who had been devastated by his death, felt a mix of relief and sorrow. They were grateful that the murderer had been caught but heartbroken over the senseless loss of their son. Veronica's friends and clients were equally shocked, struggling to reconcile the generous woman they knew with the brutal crime she had committed. Veronica Hayes was charged with second-degree murder. Her trial would reveal more about the dark side of her personality and the tragic obsession that led her to take Jacob's life. The arrest marked a crucial step in the quest for justice, but the journey was far from over. Veronica Hayes' trial for the murder of Jacob Rasmussen began in October 2016. The courtroom was packed with journalists, community members, and activists. The case had drawn national attention, with many people intrigued by the bizarre astrology defense Veronica used. She claimed she was being discriminated against because she was a Virgo, a sign known for being meticulous and perfectionistic. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Martin Delgado, argued that Veronica's obsession with Jacob had driven her to murder. Delgado, a 45-year-old with a reputation for being tough on crime, presented the evidence collected by Detective Jenkins and Officer Blake. He showed the jury the phone records placing Veronica near Jacob's apartment, the forensic evidence linking her to the scene, and the bruises on Jacob's body indicating a struggle. Delgado painted a picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, who had meticulously planned and executed the murder. He called witnesses who testified about Veronica's possessive nature and her increasing anger towards Jacob's other relationships. Delgado's argument was clear. Veronica's jealousy had turned deadly. The defense attorney, Nancy Price, took a different approach. Price, a 50-year-old known for her unconventional tactics, focused on the so-called astrology defense. She argued that Veronica was being unfairly targeted because of her zodiac sign. Price brought in experts who testified about Virgo characteristics, emphasizing that Veronica's actions were influenced by her astrological traits rather than a criminal mindset. Veronica herself took the stand, carefully claiming that she was a victim of discrimination. She insisted she had no intention of killing Jacob and that the incident was a tragic accident. Her testimony was supported by groups like Virgos United and Americans Against Birth Sign Discrimination, who protested outside the courthouse throughout the trial. They held signs demanding fair treatment for all astrological signs and decrying the injustice against Virgos. Despite the prosecution's strong case, the jury was swayed by the defense's argument. On November 15, 2016, Veronica was found guilty of manslaughter instead of murder. The judge sentenced her to 10 years in prison, a decision that shocked many who had expected a harsher punishment. Jacob's family was devastated by the verdict. They felt that justice had not been served and that Veronica's wealth and influence had played a role in her lighter sentence. Friends and supporters of Jacob were equally outraged, feeling that the trial had turned into a spectacle rather than a pursuit of justice. Veronica's supporters celebrated the verdict, viewing it as a victory against astrological discrimination. The trial and its outcomes sparked widespread debate about the role of unconventional defenses in the legal system and the influence of public opinion on judicial decisions. After Veronica Hayes' trial ended, the lives of everyone involved were changed significantly. Veronica began serving her 10-year sentence at the Florida Women's Reception Center, a medium-security prison located in Ocala. Her trial had drawn considerable media attention, and she became a controversial figure. She continued to claim she was a victim of discrimination due to her astrological sign, using the prison's library to write letters and articles about her experience. Her case remained a topic of discussion in astrological and legal circles. Jacob Rasmussen's family in Minnesota struggled to cope with the outcome of the trial. They felt the 10-year sentence was too lenient for a crime as brutal as Jacob's murder. The media frequently covered their reactions, highlighting their disappointment and grief. They continued to advocate for harsher penalties for crimes of this nature and sought to keep Jacob's memory alive through community events and online memorials. Marcus Dean, who had been a suspect in the case, faced continued scrutiny from the public. Though he was cleared of any involvement in Jacob's murder, his reputation was tarnished by his rivalry with Jacob and his history of altercations. He struggled to find work and had to deal with the fallout from the media coverage, which painted him as a potential murderer. Bryony Mitchell Keynes, another suspect, returned to Australia and faced her own challenges. The negative publicity from the cases affected her restaurant business, and she dealt with backlash from customers and critics. Bryony continued to live a quiet life, trying to distance herself from the controversy surrounding the case. The murder of Jacob Rasmussen and the subsequent trial had a lasting impact on everyone involved. It brought attention to issues of justice and discrimination, and left a mark on the community of Naples, Florida. The case became a cautionary tale about the influence of personal biases and unconventional defenses in the legal system. Paul Barstow, a 36-year-old from Boulder, Colorado. He was a man who had found balance between his professional and personal life. He worked as a software engineer, a field where he was highly respected for his skills and reliability. His work was his passion, and he often spoke of his dream to develop a groundbreaking app called Lehman, named after the groundbreaking woman's writer that would change how people interacted sexually with technology. When he wasn't at his desk, Paul was an artist. He loved to paint landscapes, often drawing inspiration from the scenic views around Boulder, nestled at the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Paul was a devoted father to his 2 young children from a previous marriage. Despite the challenges of being a single parent, he always made time for them. Paul's friends described him as calm, thoughtful, and dependable. He was the kind of person who stuck to routines, finding comfort in the predictability of his day-to-day life. In the days leading up to his death, Paul's life seemed normal on the surface, but those close to him noticed that he was increasingly troubled. His relationship with Angelica Barstow, his sister-in-law, had always been complicated. 5 years ago, they had started an affair in secret, which gave him a release from the pressures of his life, but it also filled him with guilt and unease. Paul was particularly concerned about the closeness Angelica continued to share with her husband, Jason, who ironically was also Paul's younger brother. Paul had been looking forward to a weekend trip he had planned with his children. He had rented a cabin near Est Park, hoping to spend some quality time away from the complications at home. He talked about visiting the Stanley Hotel, famous for inspiring Stephen King's The Shining, and maybe taking his kids on a ghost tour. But Paul would never make it to that trip. His life, filled with dreams of innovation and a love for nature, was about to come to a sudden, tragic end. On the night of June 5, 2017, Boulder was calm, with a soft breeze rustling through the trees. The city was settling into the warmth of summer, and most people were relaxing in their homes. At around 10:30 p.m., Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother, arrived at Paul's house. He had been trying to reach Paul all day, but his calls and texts went unanswered for several days. Jason, known for his laid-back attitude, initially thought his brother might be out hiking or simply busy with the kids. But as the hours passed, he grew increasingly worried. When Jason arrived, he found the front door slightly ajar, which was unusual for Paul, who was always careful about home security. Jason hesitated for a moment before pushing the door open and stepping inside. The house was eerily quiet, the only sound being the ticking of a wall clock. Jason called out Paul's name, but there was no response. As he moved further into the house, Jason noticed signs of a struggle in the living room. An overturned chair, scattered papers, and a coffee mug shattered on the floor. His heart raced as he made his way to the bedroom. It was there that he discovered Paul's lifeless body lying on the floor near the bed. Paul's face was pale, and a length of rope was still wrapped tightly around his neck. The sight was so shocking that Jason froze, unable to process what he was seeing. For a few moments, Jason stood there in disbelief, trying to make sense of the scene before him. His brother, always so full of life, now lay motionless. After what felt like an eternity, Jason managed to pull out his phone and dial 911. His voice trembled as he told the operator what he had found, barely able to get the words out. The dispatcher instructed him to wait outside until the police arrived. Jason stumbled out of the house, his mind racing. He sat on the front steps, staring blankly at the street, trying to hold back tears. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air as Boulder police arrived on the scene. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, drawn by the flashing lights, but Jason couldn't bring himself to look at anyone. His world had just been shattered, and all he could do was wait for the nightmare to unfold further. The Boulder police arrived quickly at Paul Barstow's home on the night of June 5, 2017. The flashing lights and sirens cut through the quiet neighborhood, alerting nearby residents that something terrible had happened. Detective Laura Reynolds, a seasoned investigator with 15 years of experience, was the first on the scene. Known for her no-nonsense approach and sharp instincts, Reynolds immediately sensed that this was no ordinary death. As she entered the house, Reynolds took in the disarray. The living room looked like it had been the site of a struggle. An overturned chair, scattered papers, and a shattered coffee mug painted a picture of chaos. But it was the scene in the bedroom that confirmed her worst fears. Paul Barstow lay on the floor, a length of rope still tightly wound around his neck. His face was pale, his eyes lifeless. The sight was disturbing, even for someone as experienced as Reynolds. The crime scene team quickly set to work, photographing the room from every angle and collecting potential evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, took samples from the rope, and carefully bagged the shattered pieces of the coffee mug. Reynolds noticed the position of Paul's body. His hands bore defensive wounds, and there were signs of bruising around his neck and face. To her, this clearly pointed to a violent struggle, suggesting that Paul had fought for his life. However, not everyone on the team was convinced. As the investigation progressed, a controversy began to brew. Some forensic experts argued that the scene could be interpreted differently. Dr. Matilda Chiang, a forensic pathologist with a reputation for thoroughness, suggested that the evidence might point to a suicide rather than a murder. She noted that the rope had been tied in a way that could be self-inflicted, and the disarray in the living room could have been caused by Paul in a distressed state. According to Dr. Chiang, it wasn't uncommon for people in deep emotional turmoil to stage scenes before taking their own lives. This conflict between several different experts created tension within the investigation. On one side, Detective Reynolds and her team were convinced that Paul had been murdered, possibly during a violent struggle. On the other side, Dr. Chang and her supporters argued for a more nuanced interpretation, one that considered the possibility of suicide. The disagreement slowed the investigation, as the team was forced to consider both possibilities, examining every piece of evidence from multiple angles. As the days passed, the pressure on the Boulder Police Department grew. The media caught wind of the conflicting theories, with local outlets like the Denver Post, a newspaper renowned for its hard-hitting investigations, running stories that questioned whether the police were pursuing the right leads. The controversy only added to the anguish of Paul's family, who were desperate for answers. They wanted to know what had really happened to the man they loved, and they demanded that the police uncover the truth, whether it pointed to murder or suicide. Angelica Barstow, Paul's sister-in-law, quickly became the first person of interest in the investigation. At 34, Angelica was known in Boulder for her quirky personality. She ran a YouTube channel with almost 100,000 subscribers called Fairy Works, where she posted videos about her interactions with fairies and other spiritual beings. The channel had gained quite a lot of attention, including from newspapers and some online outlets, but mostly for the wrong reasons. Viewers attacked her by the thousands, leaking hateful comments saying everything she was talking about was fake and that she was a liar. And by June 2017, the negativity had begun to take its toll on Angelica's mental health. Angelica's marriage to Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother, had been rocky for years. Friends and neighbors had noticed their frequent public arguments, with Angelica often seen viciously berating Jason. On one occasion, she even forced him to strip in public and humiliate himself, yelling at him to declare that he was a loser. These incidents painted a picture of a woman on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The police were aware of these issues as they began their investigation. Detective Laura Reynolds, leading the case, focused on Angelica's possible motive. It was no secret that Angelica had felt trapped in her marriage, and her affair with Paul had provided her with an escape. The affair had been passionate and secretive, with several sexually explicit texts between Angelica and Paul found on Paul's phone. But as Paul began to pull away, possibly due to the increasing tension and fear in his life, Angelica's feelings of desperation and betrayal might have deepened. During her interrogation, Angelica was calm, almost detached. She admitted to the affair, but insisted that she had nothing to do with Paul's death. "The fairies told me he was pulling away," she told Detective Reynolds. "But Lady Luna Lovegood as my witness, I would never hurt him. I loved him." However, her demeanor struck Reynolds as strange, too composed, given the circumstances. The detective noticed how Angelica's eyes darted around the room whenever she was asked about her relationship with Paul, as if searching for an answer. As the questioning continued, Angelica began to display signs of agitation. She denied any involvement in Paul's death, but couldn't explain where she had been on the night of the murder. Her alibi was vague, and when pressed for details, she became defensive. "I don't have to tell you everything, the fairies will." She snapped at one point, her voice rising. The police took note of her behavior, which only fueled their suspicions. Despite her denials, the evidence against Angelica was circumstantial at best. The text showed that the affair was real, but they didn't prove that she had murdered Paul. Still, her unstable behavior and the tension in her marriage made her a prime suspect. As the investigation continued, Detective Reynolds and her team kept a close eye on Angelica, waiting for any slip-up that might reveal more about her involvement in Paul's death. Next on the list of suspects was Jason Barstow, Paul's younger brother and Angelica's husband. Jason, 29, was known around Boulder as a charming but aimless man. He had drifted from job to job, never quite finding his footing. His easygoing attitude made him well-liked, but it also led to frequent clashes with Angelica, who was frustrated by his lack of ambition. Jason's relationship with Paul was strained, not just because of his affair with Angelica, but also due to the deep-seated envy he harbored for his older brother's success and stability. The police were aware of this sibling rivalry as they began questioning Jason. Detective Laura Reynolds, who was leading the investigation, found Jason to be cooperative but visibly nervous. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Paul's death, Jason claimed he had been at a local bar, the sink, watching the Rockies game and chatting with some friends. However, when the police checked his alibi, it didn't hold up. The bartender didn't remember seeing Jason that night, and none of the regulars could confirm his presence either. Jason's inconsistencies made the police suspicious, but there was more to consider. The tension in his marriage to Angelica had been no secret. Friends had noticed how Jason often tried to avoid confrontations with his wife, retreating into his easygoing nature whenever things got heated. But beneath his laid-back exterior, there was a man who had grown increasingly resentful of his brother's long-term affair with Angelica. Paul had everything Jason wanted: a successful career, a stable life, and for a while, a sexual relationship with Jason's own wife. During his interrogation, Jason tried to downplay the affair's impact on him. "Yeah, I was mad," he admitted to Detective Reynolds. But then he said he wasn't going to do anything about it since Paul was his brother, and while had our differences, he would never hurt Paul. His voice was steady, but Reynolds noted the way Jason's hands fidgeted constantly, a sign of his unease. The police pressed Jason about his relationship with Angelica, particularly the public arguments that had been witnessed by neighbors. Jason shrugged them off, saying, "Angelica's got a temper, but it's nothing serious. We argue. Then we bleep each other until we faint. But who doesn't?" Still, his attempts to downplay the tension didn't convince the detectives. There was something off about the way he avoided eye contact when asked about the night of Paul's murder. Despite the inconsistencies in his story, there was no concrete evidence linking Jason to the crime. His motive, anger and jealousy, was clear, but without more solid proof that the police couldn't pin the murder on him. Nevertheless, Jason remained under close scrutiny as the investigation continued, his every move watched by Detective Reynolds and her team. The final suspect under investigation was Linda Barstow, Paul's ex-wife. At 48 years old, Linda was known for her fiercely protective nature, especially when it came to her two children. Ward and Salter and her controlling tendencies had caused friction within the extended Barstow family for years. Linda and Paul had divorced amicably on the surface, but those close to the family knew there was lingering tension. Despite their split, Linda had never fully let go of her influence over Paul's life, often meddling in his personal affairs and showing up unannounced at his home. Linda's involvement in Paul's life after the divorce had always been a sore point, especially because she had a history of favoring Paul's younger brother, Jason. This blatant favoritism had always caused resentment between the brothers, but Linda seemed indifferent to the effect it had on their relationship. In fact, she had been especially close to Jason, even going so far as to engage in a brief affair with him when he was barely 18 years old. This past sexual interlude was a poorly kept secret, and it added an uncomfortable layer to the family dynamics. When the police brought Linda in for questioning, she was composed but defensive. Detective Laura Reynolds led the interrogation, asking about Linda's relationship with Paul in the months leading up to his death. Linda insisted that she had moved on from their marriage and that their relationship was strictly about co-parenting. "I was over the bleep a long time ago," she stated firmly. "Our focus was on Ward and Salter, nothing more." But Detective Reynolds wasn't convinced. Linda had a history of interfering in Paul's life, and there were rumors that she disapproved of his affair with Angelica. Friends of Linda's mentioned to the police that she had spoken openly about her disdain for Angelica, whom she considered unfit to be part of the family. Linda quickly pointed the finger at Angelica when she heard about Paul's death, telling detectives that she had always suspected Angelica was trouble. During her interrogation, Linda maintained her innocence but couldn't hide her animosity toward Angelica. "She was never good enough for Paul, and I told him that," Linda confessed. "I didn't want the bleeping bleep anywhere near my bleeping kids." Despite her strong feelings, Linda denied any involvement in Paul's death, insisting that she would never harm him, especially because of the impact it would have on their children. The police were left with a puzzle. Linda had motive, protectiveness over her children and resentment toward Angelica. But like Jason, there was no hard evidence linking her to the crime. Her strong personality and controlling nature made her a person of interest. But without more concrete proof, the detectives couldn't proceed with an arrest. The investigation continued as they sought the truth behind Paul's tragic death. On July 12, 2017, just when the investigation seemed to be hitting a dead end, a new piece of evidence emerged that changed everything. That morning, the weather was warm and sunny, typical for Boulder in early summer. A neighbor was walking her dog named Mary Sinclair Varlets when she noticed something unusual in the Barstow's trash can, which had been left out by the curb. Being a bit nosy by nature, she peeked inside and saw what appeared to be a torn piece of fabric stained with blood. Disturbed by the sight, she immediately called the police. Detective Laura Reynolds and her team arrived quickly on the scene. They retrieved the fabric, which was identified as a piece of shirt, frayed at the ends, and soaked in what was confirmed to be Paul Barstow's blood. This discovery was significant. It directly contradicted the suicide theory and pointed to a violent struggle. The shirt matched the DNA found around Paul's neck, making it a key piece of evidence in the investigation. Forensic experts were called in to analyze the rope and the bloodstains further. They also scored the Barstow's trash can for any other clues, finding nothing else of immediate interest. However, the presence of the rope was enough to reignite the investigation. Detective Reynolds felt a renewed sense of urgency. This changes everything, she felt. With the new evidence in hand, the detectives revisited their list of suspects. The t-shirt piece was likely discarded in a hurry, possibly by someone who had access to the Barstow home. The tying of the trash being taken out suggested that the killer was close to the family and knew their routines well. The team knew they had to re-interview the suspects, focusing on their whereabouts in the days after Paul's death and any potential connection to the rope. The discovery of the bloodied t-shirt piece marked a turning point in the investigation. It provided the detectives with the crucial evidence they needed to rule out suicide definitively and focus their efforts on finding the killer. The search for justice for Paul Barstow was far from over, but now the police had a new lead that could finally bring the truth to light. On July 15, 2017, Detective Laura Reynolds and her team made a breakthrough in the investigation. After weeks of questioning and collecting evidence, they identified Angelica Barstow as the prime suspect in Paul Barstow's murder. Angelica, 34, was Paul's sister-in-law and had been in a secret 5-year-long affair with him. Her strange behavior, including her obsession with fairies on her YouTube channel and the emotional turmoil she exhibited, had raised suspicions among the detectives. Angelica's alibi had fallen apart. Initially, she claimed she was at home with her children on the night of Paul's murder, but neighbors reported seeing her Chevy Malibu parked near Paul's house around the time of the crime. Moreover, Angelica's erratic behavior and emotional outbursts have been noted by several people, including her friends and family. Her YouTube channel, Fairy Works, where she talked about fairies as if they were real, had also gained a reputation for its bizarre content, which seemed to reflect her unstable mental state. On the morning of June 15, detectives arrived at Angelica's home to execute an arrest warrant. Angelica was found at her kitchen table, looking disheveled and anxious, wearing just a bra and nothing else. When the police explained that she was being arrested for Paul's murder, Angelica reacted with shock. Her face went pale, and she began to cry. "I didn't do it," she sobbed. "The fairies made me do it." Her claims about fairies seemed out of place and further raised doubts about her mental condition. Angelica was taken into custody, and the police conducted a thorough search of her home. They found more evidence linking her to the crime, including personal items belonging to Paul and additional pieces of rope that matched the one found in the trash. As the detectives interviewed her, Angelica continued to insist that she had been manipulated by fairies, a claim that seemed somewhat irrational. During her arrest, Angelica appeared bewildered and frightened, unable to comprehend the seriousness of the situation. Her emotional outbursts and strange explanations only deepened the police's belief that she was involved in the murder. Detective Reynolds described the arrest as a crucial step in solving the case. The arrest of Angelica Barstow sent shockwaves through Boulder. The community was stunned to learn that the seemingly devoted mother and wife could be involved in such a heinous crime. As the investigation moved forward, the focus shifted to understanding Angelica's motive and mental state, as the details of her involvement in Paul's murder continued to unfold. The trial of Angelica Barstow began on August 7, 2018, in Boulder County Court. The courtroom was filled with tension as people gathered to see justice for Paul Barstow. The case had attracted some media attention, with local news outlets closely covering each development. Angelica's trial was marked by intense emotions and dramatic courtroom moments. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Rachel Stone, argued that Angelica had planned and carried out Paul's murder. Stone, a 42-year-old attorney known for her tough stance on violent crimes, painted a clear picture of Angelica's motive. Stone argued Angelica's jealousy and unstable mental state led her to commit the horrific act of murdering her brother-in-law/lover. She highlighted Angelica's affair with Paul and her erratic behavior, including her bizarre claims about fairies manipulating her actions. The defense, represented by 50-year-old attorney Harold Green, took a different approach. Green argued that Angelica was suffering from severe mental illness and was not fully responsible for her actions. Green told the court that Angelica was in the grip of a psychological breakdown. He presented evidence of Angelica's ongoing struggles with mental health, including her obsession with fairies and her unstable behavior, suggesting that she was not in her right mind when the crime occurred. During the trial, Paul's family attended each day, their faces etched with sorrow. They watched as details of Paul's murder were laid bare, including the evidence of the bloody rope and Angelica's troubled past. The emotional toll on the family was evident as they heard about the affair and Angelica's claims about fairies. After several days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict on August 14, 2018. Angelica Barstow was found guilty of first-degree murder. The jury's decision was met with a mix of relief and sadness from Paul's family, who felt that justice had been served, but were still grieving their loss. On August 21, 2018, Angelica was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's decision was a reflection of the severity of her crime and the impact on Paul's family. The verdict was seen as a fair punishment by many, though some argued it was too harsh, given Angelica's mental health issues. For Paul's family and friends, the trial and sentencing brought a sense of closure but could not undo the pain of their loss. The case remained a tragic reminder of how complex and devastating personal relationships can be. After Angelica Barstow's conviction and sentencing, life in Boulder began to shift back to normal, though the impact of the case lingered for many involved. Angelica Barstow was transferred to the Colorado Department of Corrections, where she would serve her life sentence without the possibility of parole. Her life in prison was marked by ongoing psychological evaluations to address her mental health issues. While her exact location within the prison system was not publicized for security reasons, it was known that she received regular counseling and medical care. Her claims about being influenced by fairies remained a topic of discussion, both among inmates and in media reports. Jason Barstow, Angelica's husband, faced a tough road ahead. But 29-year-old had to rebuild his life. He continued to work on his personal and professional life, trying to provide stability for his family amid the upheaval. His reputation was affected by the scandal, and he struggled to find steady employment in Boulder, a city that had followed the case closely. Linda Barstow, Paul's ex-wife, also dealt with the aftermath of the trial. Her relationship with Paul's family was strained, and her public criticism of Angelica had made her a controversial figure. Linda continued to be active in community affairs, but faced criticism for her involvement in the case. She focused on her career and personal life while navigating the fallout from the trial. Paul Barstow's family, including his 2 young children, found some measure of closure with the trial's conclusion. They received counseling to help them cope with their loss and the public nature of the case. They continued to honor Paul's memory through private gatherings and by sharing stories of his life and work. The Boulder community also rallied around them, offering support and sympathy as they moved forward. In summary, the aftermath of the trial saw significant changes in the lives of those involved. The case left a lasting impact on Boulder, with the community reflecting on the complexities of personal relationships and mental health. While Angelica Barstow faced the consequences of her actions, those affected by the case worked to rebuild their lives and find a sense of normalcy. Jake Malton was 35 years old when he died. He lived in Naperville, Illinois, a peaceful suburb near Chicago. Jake was a well-respected man with a sharp mind and a charming personality. He worked as a finance manager at a local investment firm, where he was known for his leadership skills and dedication. He had graduated from Northwestern University with a degree in finance and was seen as a rising star in his field. At home, Jake was a loving father and devoted husband. He lived with his wife, Laura Beth Malton, and their 2 children, Ponderosa and Arson. Jake had a passion for sailing Lake Michigan and spent many weekends at the local marina with his children. His kids loved these outings, and Jake often talked about buying a small sailboat. He was also an active member of the community, participating in local events and charity drives. Jake's personality was a mix of professionalism and warmth. He was friendly and approachable, making him well-liked by his colleagues and neighbors. Jake dreamed of one day taking a sabbatical to spend more time with his family and perhaps travel around the world. In the days leading up to his death, Jake was busy planning a family vacation to the Bahamas, He wanted to surprise his children with the trip, and they were excited about it. In February of 2012, Naperville was frigid, with temperatures often dipping below freezing. The local news was buzzing about the upcoming Super Bowl. Jake, a fan of the Chicago Bears, enjoyed discussing the games with his friends. He was also a subscriber to the Wall Street Journal and kept up with the latest news in finance and business. Jake and his family lived in a comfortable home in a quiet neighborhood. Their house was always warm and inviting, with a cozy living room filled with family photos and mementos from their trips. The Malton family was close-knit, often spending evenings together watching movies or playing board games like Monopoly and Scrabble. In his professional life, Jake had recently been working on a big project at his firm, which had been taking up a lot of his time. Despite his busy schedule, he always made time for his family. His colleagues admired his ability to balance work and family life so well. Jake's dreams and plans for the future were cut short by his tragic death, leaving a void in the lives of those who knew and loved him. On the morning of February 18, 2012, at around 7:30 a.m., a tragic discovery was made in Naperville, Illinois. Laura Beth Malden, Jake Malden's wife, woke up and found her husband's body lying next to her in their bedroom. He had been shot twice. The room was eerily clean, with no signs of a struggle, which suggested that the crime had been planned. Laura Beth, upon finding Jake dead in their bed, was in a state of shock. She immediately called 911, her voice shaking as she spoke to the emergency operator. The operator tried to keep Laura Beth calm while dispatching police and emergency services to their home. Laura Beth's voice trembled as she described finding Jake. Her words were frantic, and she could hardly believe what she was seeing. The operator stayed on the line with her until help arrived. When the police arrived, they found Laura Beth sitting on the floor outside the bedroom, crying and holding her phone. The house was in perfect order, except for the horrifying sight in the bedroom. Jake was lying on the bed, and it was clear he had been dead for several hours. The officers immediately secured the area and began their investigation. By mid-morning, the news had spread throughout Naperville. Local news channels like NBC Chicago and newspapers such as the Chicago Tribune began reporting on the incident. The media coverage added to the tension as reporters and cameras gathered outside the Malton home. As the day went on, the police continued to piece together the events leading up to Jake's death. Laura Beth was taken to the station for questioning, still in a state of shock. The detectives knew they had to act quickly to solve the mystery of Jake Malden's death. On February 18, 2012, the police arrived quickly at the Malton home in Naperville, Illinois. They entered the quiet, neat house and found Laura Beth Malden sitting outside the bedroom, crying. The officers immediately secured the area and called in detectives. Detective Jason Hollis and Detective Sarah Lee Green, both experienced investigators, arrived soon after. Hollis was known for being methodical and detail-oriented, while Green had a reputation for her sharp intuition. They began by carefully examining the bedroom where Jake Malden's body was found. The scene was eerily tidy, with no signs of a struggle, suggesting that the murder had been carefully planned. Jake had been shot twice, and there was no sign of forced entry into the house. Detectives Hollis and Green used various tools to investigate the crime scene. They sprayed luminol, a chemical that glows blue in the presence of blood, to check for any traces that might have been cleaned up. They also took photographs and collected fingerprints from around the room. Forensic experts arrived to gather evidence, including fibers and hair samples, which they bagged and tagged for further analysis. The detectives then moved on to interviewing Laura Beth, who was still in shock. She told them that she had woken up to find Jake dead beside her. Her statements were emotional and confused, making it hard for the detectives to get a clear picture. The officers also spoke with the neighbors, but no one had seen or heard anything unusual, except for one elderly neighbor who mentioned hearing a loud noise the night before. As the investigation continued, the detectives discovered that Jake had been shot with a small-caliber handgun. They searched the house thoroughly, but did not find the weapon. This made them suspect that the killer had taken it with them. They also checked the security cameras in the neighborhood, hoping to find any clues, but the footage did not reveal any suspicious activity. The detectives knew they had to work quickly. They analyzed the evidence collected from the scene, hoping to find leads that would point them toward the murderer. The tidy crime scene, the lack of forced entry, and the missing weapon all suggested that the killer was someone who knew Jake well. Detectives Hollis and Green were determined to uncover the truth and bring justice to Jake Malden. The first suspect in Jake Malden's murder was his wife, Laura Beth Malden. Laura Beth was 32 years old and known for being outgoing and sociable. She had a passion for literature and loved hosting book clubs and charity events at their home. People in the community described her as warm and generous, but lately, some friends had noticed she seemed more withdrawn and anxious. Given that she had easy access to Jake's bedroom, the police had to consider her a suspect. On February 18, 2012, after the police secured the crime scene, Laura Beth was taken to the police station for questioning. The detectives, Jason Hollis and Sarah Lee Green, wanted to know more about her relationship with Jake and her activities the night he was killed. During the interrogation, Laura Beth was visibly upset. She was crying and seemed very confused. Her voice trembled as she explained that she had woken up and found Jake dead beside her. Detective Hollis asked her detailed questions about their relationship, and Laura Beth admitted that they had been going through a rough patch. She mentioned that Jake had been very busy with work and that they had been arguing more than usual. Detective Green asked about the gun used in the murder. Laura Beth denied knowing anything about it. She insisted that she did not own a gun and had no idea where it could have come from. The detectives noted that Laura Beth's responses were emotional, and at times she seemed overwhelmed. Her demeanor was a mix of sorrow and confusion, making it hard for the detectives to determine if she was hiding something or genuinely shocked by her husband's death. As the interrogation continued, the detectives learned more about the Moultons' financial situation. Laura Beth mentioned that Jake handled most of their finances and that she was not aware of any major issues. However, she did know that Jake had been stressed about a big project at work. Meanwhile, the police continued to gather evidence from the Moulton home. They searched for any signs that could link Laura Beth to the crime. They checked her phone records, emails, and social media accounts, looking for any clues. Despite the lack of clear evidence pointing directly at Laura Beth, her emotional state and proximity to the crime made her a key figure in the investigation. The detectives knew they needed more information to either confirm or dismiss their suspicions about her involvement in Jake's death. The second suspect in Jake Moulton's murder was his boss, Merle O'Brien. Merle was 48 years old and known as an ambitious, driven man. He had built his investment firm from the ground up and was described as a workaholic. Merle was meticulous and sometimes ruthless in his business dealings. Recently, Jake and Merle had disagreed over the direction of the company, leading to tension between them. On February 19, 2012, the day after Jake was found dead, detectives Jason Hollis and Sarah Lee Green brought Merle in for questioning. Merle arrived at the police station in a neat suit, looking calm and composed. He greeted the detectives with a firm handshake, showing no signs of nervousness. Detective Hollis started by asking Merle about his relationship with Jake. Merle admitted that they had disagreements, but insisted it was nothing out of the ordinary for business partners. He spoke highly of Jake's skills and expressed shock at his death. Detective Green then asked about the night of the murder. Merle provided an alibi, stating he was at a company dinner event. He even named several colleagues who could confirm his whereabouts. The detectives also questioned Merle about rumors that Jake was planning to report him for sexually harassing secretaries at the firm. Merle's demeanor shifted slightly, but he remained composed. He denied any wrongdoing and suggested that Jake might have been mistaken or misled. The police also investigated Merle's financial records and found that Jake had been handling a major project that could have impacted the company's future. This project had been a source of their recent disagreements. The detectives considered the possibility that Merle had a financial motive to get rid of Jake. As the questioning continued, Merle kept his composure, calmly answering all of the detectives' questions. He maintained that he had no reason to harm Jake and that their disagreements were purely professional. Detective Hollis and Detective Green noted that while Merle seemed to have a solid alibi, his motive couldn't be ignored. They decided to verify his alibi by speaking with his colleagues and checking the event's guest list. They also continued to look into the company's financial dealings, hoping to find more clues. Despite Merle's calm and collected responses, the detectives knew they had to keep investigating all angles. Merle remained a key suspect as they worked to uncover the truth behind Jake Moulton's murder. On February 21, 2012, 3 days after Jake Moulton's death, the weather in Naperville was cold and overcast. At around 10:00 a.m., a breakthrough in the case occurred. A neighbor, while walking her dog near the Moulton home, was shocked to find a small handgun in a nearby park. The park was a popular spot for families and dog walkers, making it an unusual place to find a weapon. The neighbor immediately called the police. Detectives Jason Hollis and Sarah Lee Green were informed about the new evidence. They felt a sense of urgency as they awaited the forensic results. Later that afternoon, the forensic team confirmed that the handgun was indeed the one used to kill Jake. The discovery of the gun was a significant development in the investigation. The detectives reviewed the security footage from the park but found nothing suspicious. They decided to canvass the neighborhood again, hoping to find witnesses who might have seen someone disposing of the gun. They spoke with several residents, including an elderly neighbor, who mentioned seeing a woman walking toward the park late at night, but she couldn't identify her. As they investigated further, Detective Hollis found fingerprints on the gun. The prints matched those of Marie Castelchant, the Maltons' next-door neighbor and a close friend of Laura Beth. Marie was known for being kind-hearted and loyal. This connection made her a key person of interest. With this new evidence, the detectives felt they were getting closer to solving the case. The discovery of the gun and the connection to Marie added a new layer of complexity, but it also brought them one step closer to finding Jake Malton's murderer. The third suspect in Jake Malton's murder was Marie Castelchant, the Maltons' next-door neighbor. Marie, 38, was known for her kindness and loyalty in the community, but she harbored a secret life as well. Under the alias Cookie LaGuardia, Marie worked as a stripper, a fact that added a layer of complexity to the investigation. On February 22, 2012, detectives Jason Hollis and Sarah Lee Green brought Marie in for questioning. The day was cold and cloudy, typical of February in Naperville. Mary looked nervous as she entered the police station, aware that her fingerprints had been found on the gun used to kill Jake. Detective Hollis started the interrogation by asking Marie about her relationship with the Maltons. She admitted that she and Jake had been having an affair, but insisted that she had nothing to do with his murder. Marie explained that she had been home alone the night Jake was killed, which made her alibi weak. Detective Green then asked about the handgun found in the park. Mary became visibly anxious and struggled to explain how her fingerprints ended up on the weapon. She said that Jake had visited her a few days before his death and brought the gun with him. According to Mary, Jake was worried about their affair being discovered and wanted to protect her. However, this explanation seemed suspicious to the detectives. The police also discovered that Jake had secretly mortgaged his house to pay Mary's bills. This financial connection added another layer to the investigation, suggesting a possible motive for Marie. Despite her calm and kind demeanor, the detectives knew they had to dig deeper into her background. As they questioned Marie further, the detectives noticed inconsistencies in her story. She initially claimed she had no idea Jake was playing Divisic the night of his death, but later admitted he had called her earlier that day. Detective Hollis pressed on, asking why she hadn't mentioned this earlier. Mary became flustered and started to stammer. To gather more evidence, the detectives decided to search Marie's home. They found letters from Jake expressing regret over their affair and hinting at emotional manipulation within his marriage. These letters provided insight into Jake's state of mind and suggested that he was planning to confess to Laura Beth and end the affair. Detectives Hollis and Green knew they had to proceed carefully. They continued to investigate Mary's connection to Jake, hoping to find the evidence needed to solve the case and bring justice for Jake Malton. On February 23, 2012, the police in Naperville, Illinois, were ready to make an arrest in the murder of Jake Malton. After days of investigation, they had gathered enough evidence to identify the murderer. The police had pieced together a tragic story of betrayal, financial stress, and emotional breakdown. The detectives found a crucial piece of evidence in Jake's home office, a letter he had written to his children, Ponderosa and Arson. In the letter, Jake expressed regret and guilt over his affair with Marie Castelchant. He also mentioned his plans to confess to Laura Beth and end the affair. The letter showed a darker side of Jake, hinting at emotional manipulation within his marriage. This letter, combined with the evidence gathered, pointed to Laura Beth Malton as the murderer. Detectives Jason Hollis and Sarah Lee Green arrived at the Malton home at 9:00 a.m. to arrest Laura Beth. The morning was cold, with a light snowfall covering the ground. Laura Beth was in the kitchen, making breakfast for her children. When the detectives informed her of the arrest, she was visibly shocked. She broke down in tears, repeatedly screaming, "Let those without sin cast the first stone." The detectives carefully explained the evidence against her. They mentioned the financial stress caused by Jake's secret mortgage to pay Mary's bills and the emotional toll of discovering his affair. They also pointed out the letter Jake had written, which showed his intention to confess and the manipulation within their marriage. Laura Beth's world had been shattered by these revelations, leading her to a breaking point. Laura Beth was handcuffed and taken to the police station. The local news stations, including NBC Chicago, quickly picked up the story. Reporters gathered outside the Malton home, capturing the moment as Laura Beth was led away by the police. The community was in shock, struggling to comprehend how a seemingly perfect family could be torn apart by such a tragedy. At the police station, Laura Beth made a chilling confession to the murder. She explained that she had found out about Jake's affair and the financial problems he had caused. In a moment of utter despair and emotional breakdown, she had shot Jake in their bedroom, unable to cope with the betrayal and stress. She admitted to disposing of the gun in the nearby park, hoping to distance herself from the crime. The arrest of Laura Beth brought a sense of relief to Jake's family and friends, but it also left them with a deep sadness. They struggled to understand how things had gone so wrong. The detectives felt a mix of satisfaction and sorrow, knowing they had solved the case but also aware of the devastating impact on the Malton family. The trial of Laura Beth Malton began on May 15, 2012, in Naperville, Illinois. The courtroom was packed with local residents, reporters from NBC Chicago, and members of Jake Malton's family. The atmosphere was tense as everyone awaited the outcome of this tragic case. The prosecution was led by Assistant State's Attorney Michael Health Backley, a 45-year-old known for his strong sense of justice and meticulous preparation. Health Backley argued that Laura Beth had carefully planned the murder of her husband, driven by jealousy and financial stress. He presented evidence of Jake's affair with Marie Castelchin, the financial problems due to the secret mortgage, and the letter Jake had written, which showed his intention to confess and end the affair. Health Backley painted a picture of Laura Beth as a woman pushed to the edge, ultimately committing a desperate act of violence. The defense attorney, Dorothea Blake, a 38-year-old with a reputation for her empathetic approach, represented Laura Beth. Blake argued that Laura Beth was a devoted wife and mother who had been emotionally manipulated by Jake. She claimed that Laura Beth's actions were the result of a momentary breakdown caused by extreme emotional distress. Blake highlighted Laura Beth's clean record and her dedication to her family, suggesting that she was not capable of premeditated murder. As the trial proceeded, the emotional toll on Jake's family was evident. His children, Ponderosa and Arson, were seen in the courtroom, supported by other family members. They appeared heartbroken and confused, struggling to understand the events that had led to their father's death and their mother's trial. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 3 days. On June 1, 2012, they returned with a verdict of guilty of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Laura Beth Malton to 20 years in prison, considering the emotional distress she had been under but also the severity of her crime. The reaction to the verdict was mixed. Jake's family felt a sense of justice, but were also saddened by the reality that Laura Beth, someone they had known and loved, was responsible for his death. Some community members felt the sentence was too lenient, while others believed it was fair given the circumstances. The trial and verdict had a profound effect on everyone involved. Jake's family and friends were left to pick up the pieces, struggling with the loss of both Jake and Laura Beth. The community of Naperville was deeply affected as they had lost a respected member and witnessed the unraveling of what seemed to be a perfect family. In the aftermath, discussions about emotional health and the pressures of maintaining a facade and seemingly perfect lives became more prominent. The trial had not only brought closure to Jake's murder, but also shed light on the underlying issues that led to this tragic event. After Laura Beth Malton's trial and sentencing, life in Naperville slowly returned to normal, but the effects of Jake Malton's murder lingered in the community. The Malton children, Ponderosa and Arson, were taken in by their grandparents, who provided them with love and stability during this difficult time. They received support from neighbors and friends, who rallied around them in their grief. Meanwhile, the Malton family home became a quiet reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded there. The neighbors, who had once seen the Maltons as a model family, now whispered about the secrets that had torn them apart. The local newspaper, Naperville Sun, covered the aftermath of the trial extensively, reflecting on the impact of the case on the tight-knit community. Laura Beth Malton began serving her sentence at White Correctional Center, a women's prison in Illinois. Her adjustment to prison life was difficult, as she navigated the challenges of being away from her children and coming to terms with her actions. Reports from the prison mentioned that Laura Beth kept to herself, spending her days reflecting on her choices and participating in prison programs aimed at rehabilitation. The trial also sparked discussions in Naperville about the pressures of maintaining appearances and the impact of emotional distress on individuals and families. Some community members advocated for better mental health support, while others emphasized the importance of open communication in relationships. In the years following the trial, Ponderosa and Arson grew up surrounded by love and support from their extended family. They remembered their father fondly and cherished the memories they had of him sailing and enjoying family vacations. Their resilience and strength became a testament to the community's ability to come together in the face of adversity.
Jessica "Jessie" Harper was a 29-year-old woman living in Athens, Georgia. She worked as a barista at Starbucks, where she was known for her friendly smile and artistic coffee creations. Jessie had a vibrant personality and loved to bring joy to those around her. She often worked on art projects in her free time, dreaming of opening her own gallery someday. Jessie lived in a small apartment close to downtown Athens, where she enjoyed the lively atmosphere and community events. Jessie had a close-knit group of friends and was well-liked by her coworkers. She was sociable, often organizing get-togethers and participating in local art shows. Her friends described her as creative and free-spirited, someone who could light up any room. Jessie was also involved in various local activities, such as volunteering at the animal shelter and attending music festivals. Born and raised in Athens, Jessie attended Clark Central High School and later took some art classes at the University of Georgia. Her family included her elderly husband, Dan Harper, a retired photography professor, and her younger brother, Mark Harper, who lived in Boston. Jessie's relationship with Dan was complicated by their 63-year age difference and Dan's health problems. Despite these challenges, Jessie remained dedicated to her marriage. In the days before her death, Jessie was busy with her usual activities. She had just finished a large mural at a local cafe and was excited about its positive reception. She was also preparing for an art exhibition at a nearby gallery, where she planned to showcase her latest pieces. Jessie spent her days working at Starbucks, catching up with friends, and creating art. She often talked about her future plans and dreams, showing her optimistic outlook on life. However, Jessie's personal life was not without its difficulties. She was involved in a love triangle with her husband, Dan, and her close friend and coworker, Jessica "Jess" Owens. This complicated relationship added stress to Jessie's life, though she tried to keep a positive attitude. On the morning of August 15, 2010, Jessie Harper's life would come to a tragic end. Her vibrant personality and creative spirit were well known in Athens, and her death shocked the community. Jessie was a beloved figure whose dreams and kindness left a lasting impact on those who knew her. On the morning of August 15, 2010, Athens, Georgia was enjoying a clear, sunny day with temperatures in the mid-70s. The town was quiet, with many people still recovering from the excitement of the recent Twilight Criterium, a popular annual bike race. At 8:30 a.m., Patty Johnson, Jessie's next-door neighbor, began to worry. She hadn't seen Jessie in a few days, which was unusual since they often chatted in the hallway. Patty, a 45-year-old schoolteacher, decided to check on Jessie. She knocked on the door, but got no answer. Knowing Jessie often left a spare key with her, Patty decided to use it. As she opened the door, a sense of dread filled her. The apartment was eerily quiet, with the only sound being the hum of the air conditioner. Patty called out Jessie's name, but got no response. As Patty walked into the living room, she made a horrifying discovery. Jessie was lying on the floor, motionless. A silk scarf was tightly wrapped around her neck, and her face was pale. Shocked and terrified, Patty immediately backed out of the apartment and dialed 911, her hands shaking. Within minutes, emergency services arrived at the scene. Paramedics quickly confirmed that Jessie was dead. The police arrived shortly after. Patty was visibly shaken as she spoke with them. She described Jessie as a cheerful and friendly neighbor who had never shown any signs of trouble. Patty's account was filled with sadness and disbelief. She could not understand who would want to hurt Jessie. The news of Jessie's death quickly spread through the community. The local newspaper, the Athens Banner-Herald, reported on the tragic incident, and residents were stunned. Jessie's co-workers at Starbucks were particularly devastated, as they had considered her a close friend. The discovery of Jessie's body marked the beginning of a complex investigation that would soon reveal the dark secrets of those closest to her. On the morning of August 15, 2010, the Athens Police Department swiftly responded to the 911 call about Jessie Harper's death. Detective Michael Reynolds and Officer Sarah Thompson led the investigation. Detective Reynolds, known for his calm demeanor and methodical approach, was a veteran in the department. Officer Thompson, respected for her keen attention to detail, was relatively new but already showed promise. Upon arriving at Jessie's apartment, the police immediately secured the area. The living room where Jesse's body was found was unsettling. The sight of the young woman with a silk scarf tightly wrapped around her neck was a chilling image.
The room itself was mostly tidy, but there were signs of a struggle, an overturned coffee table, and a few scattered cushions. The apartment showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting Jesse knew her attacker. Detective Reynolds began examining the scene, carefully noting every detail. Officer Thompson started taking photographs and collecting evidence. They found fingerprints on the silk scarf and various surfaces in the apartment. But police also took samples for DNA testing. The crime scene investigators dusted for prints, collected fibers, and looked for any other potential clues that could point to the murderer. The Athens police used the latest forensic tools available in 2010. They brought in a luminol spray to check for any hidden bloodstains and used an alternate light source to find fibers or hairs that might not be visible to the naked eye. They also checked Jesse's phone and computer for any recent communications that could provide clues. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Reynolds and Officer Thompson interviewed neighbors and friends. Karen Johnson, who had found Jesse, described the victim as a friendly and cheerful neighbor. She mentioned Jesse's complicated personal life, including her relationships with her husband, Dan Harper, and her friend, Jessica Jess Owens. The investigators also spoke with Jesse's coworkers at Starbucks. They described Jesse as a kind and creative person, but hinted at some recent tension between her and Jess Owens. This information helped the police narrow down their list of suspects. Throughout the day, the police worked diligently to gather all possible evidence from the crime scene. The discovery of Jesse Harper's body had shaken the community, and the police were determined to find her killer. Detective Reynolds and Officer Thompson knew that solving this case would require piecing together the puzzle of Jesse's life and relationships. Dan Harper, the first suspect, was 92 years old and Jesse's husband. A retired photography professor of the University of Georgia, Dan was famous for his work during the Korean War for Life magazine. He met Jesse when she was 19, and they quickly started dating, despite the 63-year age difference. Dan was known for his adventurous spirit and charm, but his intense nature sometimes led to possessiveness. His frequent hospital visits for health issues created tension in their marriage, adding to the complications of their relationship. The police brought Dan in for questioning at the Athens Police Department. Detective Michael Reynolds led the interrogation, wanting to understand Dan's perspective and his possible involvement in Jesse's death. Dan appeared heartbroken and tired as he sat down with the detectives. His eyes were filled with sadness, and he spoke softly but firmly, denying any involvement in the crime. Dan described his relationship with Jesse as loving but strained due to his health problems. He admitted to feeling jealous at times, especially when Jesse spent time with her friends or worked late at Starbucks. However, he insisted that he would never harm her. He told the detectives about his last interaction with Jesse, which had been a simple conversation about her upcoming art show. Dan's alibi for the night of the murder was his hospital stay, where he was being treated for a chronic illness. The detectives checked Dan's alibi and found it solid. Hospital records confirmed he was admitted the night Jesse was killed. Despite this, they continued to probe for more information, hoping to uncover any details that could help them understand Jesse's life and potential threats. During the interrogation, Dan remained calm but visibly distraught. He answered the questions patiently, often pausing to collect his thoughts. He expressed deep sorrow over Jesse's death and a strong desire to see her killer brought to justice. Dan's love for Jesse was evident, and its heartbreak seemed genuine. As the investigation continued, the police turned their attention to other suspects, but Dan Harper remained a person of interest due to his close relationship with the victim and the complexities within their marriage. They hoped further investigation would reveal more about who could have wanted Jesse dead. The second suspect in Jesse Harper's murder was Jessica Jess Owens, a 27-year-old co-worker and close friend of Jesse. Jess Owens worked with Jesse at Starbucks, where their friendship blossomed into a secret sexual relationship. Jess was known for her warm and friendly personality, but she also struggled with feelings of insecurity, especially about Jesse's relationship with her husband, Dan Harper. On August 16, 2010, the police brought Jess Owens in for questioning at the Athens Police Department. Detective Michael Reynolds and Officer Sarah Thompson led the interrogation. Jess appeared nervous as she entered the room, her eyes red from crying. She sat down and took a deep breath before the questioning began. Jess described her relationship with Jesse as more than just friendship. She admitted they had been involved in a sexual relationship for several months. She spoke about how much she loved Jesse and how their bond had grown stronger over time. Jess explained that while she knew about Jesse's marriage to Dan, she believed Jesse would eventually leave him for her. When asked about the night of the murder, Jess said she had been at home, feeling unwell. She stated that she had not seen Jesse since their shift together at Starbucks the day before. However, her alibi was weak, as no one could confirm her whereabouts during the crucial hours. Detective Reynolds and Officer Thompson pressed further, asking Jess about any recent arguments or conflicts with Jesse. Jess admitted they had argued a few days before the murder. She confessed that she was jealous and frustrated about Jesse's relationship with Dan, but she insisted she would never harm Jesse. Jess was visibly emotional, her voice trembling as she spoke about how much she missed Jesse. The police searched Jess's apartment and belongings for any evidence linking her to the crime. They found a few items that raised suspicion, including a silk scarf similar to the one used to strangle Jesse. This discovery made Jess a prime suspect, despite her emotional pleas of innocence. Jess's reaction to the interrogation was a mix of sorrow and anxiety. She was cooperative but clearly distressed, repeatedly expressing her love for Jesse and her disbelief that she was a suspect. The police noted her emotional volatility and the contradictions in her statements, which added to their suspicion. As the investigation progressed, the detectives kept Jess Owens under close scrutiny. They knew her complicated relationship with Jesse and her emotional instability could be key to solving the case. Jess remained a central figure in their search for the truth behind Jesse Harper's tragic death. On August 20, 2010, 5 days after Jesse Harper's murder, the weather in Athens, Georgia, was hot and humid. The police were still hard at work trying to solve the case. That morning, a breakthrough came when a maintenance worker found a small piece of paper in the hallway near Jesse's apartment. The paper appeared to be a torn note with handwriting on it. He quickly handed the note over to Detective Michael Reynolds and Officer Sarah Thompson, who were still investigating the case. The note read, "Meet me at 8. We need to talk. Jay." The detectives believed the note was written by Jess Owens. The handwriting was similar to Jess's, and the detectives knew that Jay was how Jess signed her notes to Jesse. This new piece of evidence shifted the focus back to Jess Owens. The note suggested that she had planned to meet Jesse on the night of the murder. Detective Reynolds and Officer Thompson re-interviewed Jess Owens, presenting her with the note. Jess looked shocked and admitted that she had written the note, but insisted she had not met Jesse that night. Jess's reaction was a mix of fear and confusion. She repeated her earlier statements about being at home and feeling unwell. Despite her claims, the detectives felt they were getting closer to the truth. They decided to take a closer look at Jess's phone records and text messages. They found several messages between Jess and Jesse, showing a pattern of arguments and reconciliation. The last message from Jess to Jesse read, "I'll be there at 8. We need to sort this bleep out." The detectives also revisited the evidence collected from Jess's apartment. They re-examined the silk scarf they had found, comparing it to the one used to strangle Jesse. Forensic tests showed that both scarves were from the same set, a limited edition sold at a local boutique where both women had shopped. With this new evidence, the detectives were more convinced than ever that Jess Owens was hiding something. They continued to press her, hoping to uncover the full truth about what had happened on the night of August 15. The discovery of the torn note was a significant step forward in the investigation, bringing the police closer to solving the mystery of Jesse Harper's tragic death. The third suspect in Jesse Harper's murder was Maximo Lorona Rodriguez, a 35-year-old local gang leader. Known for his violent past and current involvement in criminal activities, Maximo had a reputation for being both ambitious and controlling. He had a tumultuous relationship with Jess before they broke up, but he never fully moved on and continued to harbor strong feelings for her. On August 21, 2010, the Athens Police Department decided to bring Maximo in for questioning. The weather that day was sweltering, with temperatures soaring into the high 80s. Detective Michael Reynolds and Officer Sarah Thompson knew that interviewing Maximo would be challenging given his criminal background and notorious temper. Maximo arrived at the police station, his demeanor guarded and intimidating. Detective Reynolds started the questioning by asking about his relationship with Jesse Harper. Maximo spoke in a low, firm voice, describing how he and Jesse had once been close but had drifted apart after she got married. He admitted that he was still upset about their breakup and had difficulty letting go, but he denied having any involvement in her death. The detectives pressed Maximo about his whereabouts on the night of the murder. Maximo claimed he had been with his gang members at a local bar, the Globe, a well-known spot in downtown Athens. He provided names of several individuals who could vouch for him. Despite his alibi, Detective Reynolds and Officer Thompson were skeptical. They knew that Maximo's gang could easily cover for him if he was involved in a crime. The police checked Maximo's alibi by interviewing patrons and staff at the Globe. Some confirmed seeing him there, but the timeline was fuzzy, leaving gaps that could not be accounted for. Additionally, the police found no physical evidence linking Maximo directly to the crime scene, but his volatile nature and unresolved feelings for Jesse kept him under suspicion. Maximo's reaction during the interrogation was a mix of anger and frustration. He was cooperative to an extent but became increasingly agitated when the detectives suggested he might have a motive for killing Jesse. He vehemently denied any wrongdoing, insisting he was being targeted because of his past. Despite Maximo's strong denials, the detectives remained cautious. They knew that his history of violence and his lingering emotions for Jesse made him a potential suspect. They continued to gather evidence and monitor his activities, hoping to find something that could either incriminate or exonerate him. On August 25, 2010, the Athens Police Department made a breakthrough in the Jesse Harper murder case. The day was hot and sultry, with temperatures reaching into the low 90s. Detective Michael Reynolds and Officer Sarah Thompson were going through the evidence once again when it received the final forensic report. The report confirmed that the fingerprints on the silk scarf used to strangle Jesse matched those of Jess Owens. With this crucial piece of evidence, police were now confident that Jess Owens was the murderer. Jess, 27, had been Jesse's co-worker and secret lover. She was known for her friendly and sensitive nature, but struggled with jealousy and insecurity about Jesse's relationship with her husband, Dan Harper. Jess's emotions had spiraled out of control, leading her to commit the crime. Jess's motive was a combination of love, fear, and desperation. She couldn't bear the thought of losing Jesse to Dan. On the night of the murder, Jess went to Jesse's apartment, hoping to resolve their issues. However, the conversation quickly turned into a heated argument. In a fit of rage and desperation, Jess grabbed one of Jesse's silk scarves and strangled her. Detective Reynolds and Officer Thompson reviewed the timeline and evidence carefully before making their move. They knew they needed to arrest Jess before she could flee or destroy more evidence. The police arrived at Jess's apartment in the late afternoon, when the heat of the day had started to wane. Jess Owens was taken by surprise when the officers knocked on her door. She opened it, looking anxious and tired. The detectives informed her of the charges and placed her under arrest. Jess's reaction was a mix of shock and resignation. She didn't resist and was quietly taken to the police station. News of Jess's arrest spread quickly through Athens. Jesse Harper's family were relieved that the murderer had been caught, but heartbroken to learn it was someone Jesse had trusted and loved. The community, too, was shaken by the revelation that Jess Owens, a seemingly gentle and kind woman, could commit such a violent act. As Jess was led away in handcuffs, she seemed to accept her fate. The police had uncovered the truth, and justice for Jesse Harper was now within reach. The arrest of Jess Owens marked a significant step in the case, bringing closure to Jesse's grieving family and friends. The trial of Jess Owens began on October 15, 2010, in Athens, Georgia. The courtroom was packed with media, friends, and family, all eager to see justice served for Jesse Harper. The prosecutor, Lisa Bennett, was a determined 45-year-old with a reputation for being tough on crime. She opened the case by presenting the evidence against Jess, including the forensic report and the silk scarf used to strangle Jesse. Lisa argued that Jess's jealousy and desperation led her to commit the murder. The defense attorney, Laird Stevens, a 50-year-old known for his calm and collected demeanor, argued that Jess Owens had acted in a moment of emotional turmoil and did not intend to kill Jesse. He emphasized Jess's emotional instability and tried to paint her as a victim of her own feelings. He called on character witnesses to testify about Jess's generally kind and gentle nature, hoping to elicit sympathy from the jury. Throughout the trial, Jesse Harper's family sat in the front row, visibly emotional. Her mother, Carol Harper, often clutched a photo of Jesse, tears streaming down her face. The trial brought back painful memories for them, but they remained hopeful that justice would be served. The jury deliberated for 3 days, carefully considering all the evidence and arguments. On October 25, 2010, they reached a verdict. The courtroom was silent as the jury foreman stood up and announced the decision. Jess Owens was found guilty of second-degree murder. The verdict brought a mix of relief and sadness to Jesse's family. They were glad that justice had been served, but were also deeply saddened by the tragic circumstances. The judge sentenced Jess Owens to 25 years in prison. As the sentence was read, Jess showed little emotion. She seemed resigned to her fate, understanding that her actions had irreversible consequences. The severity of the sentence was seen as appropriate by many, given the premeditated nature of the crime. The media covered the trial extensively, with local news stations like LUSB-TV and newspapers like the Athens Banner-Herald reporting on every detail. The public reaction was mixed. Some felt the sentence was just, while others believed it was too lenient, considering the loss of Jesse Harper's life. The trial and its outcome had a profound impact on all those involved. For Jesse's family, it marked the end of a painful chapter, but the loss they felt was permanent. The community of Athens was left to grapple with the reality that such a tragic event could occur in their town. After the trial of Jess Owens, life slowly began to move on for everyone involved, but the impact of Jesse Harper's murder was lasting. Jesse's family, particularly her mother, struggled with the grief of losing their vibrant daughter. Dan Harper, Jesse's husband, faced a different kind of aftermath. He had lost not only his wife, but also his reputation was tainted by the scandal of the love triangle. Dan, who had been a respected retired photography professor, decided to move to a smaller town in North Georgia to start anew. He spent his days focusing on his health and his passion for photography, hoping to find peace in his work. Jess Owens began serving her 25-year sentence at the Pulaski State Prison. She enrolled in educational programs and sought therapy to address her emotional issues. Jess's time in prison was marked by self-reflection and an effort to understand the depth of her actions and their consequences. She often expressed remorse for what she had done, writing letters to Jesse's family in hopes of finding some form of redemption. The Athens community was also affected by the murder and the trial. Local businesses, including the Starbucks where Jesse and Jess had worked, held a memorial for Jesse. Friends and coworkers gathered to share memories and honor her life. The case had brought the community closer, reminding everyone of the importance of supporting one another in times of tragedy. Maximo Lorona Rodriguez, once a suspect, faced his own legal battles unrelated to Jesse's murder. He continued to be involved in gang-related activities and was eventually convicted for his previous crimes. His life took a different path, but the investigation into Jesse's murder had brought his violent past into the spotlight. Life after the trial was about healing and finding ways to move forward for all those touched by Jesse Harper's tragic death. The community of Athens, along with Jesse's friends and family, worked to honor her memory and support each other through the lasting pain of their loss. This is the story of Sarah Miller, a compassionate nurse, loving wife, and mother whose life was cruelly cut short, a victim of a twisted love triangle. It was a calm, sunny morning in Roseville, California on March 15, 2021. Around 7:30 a.m., David Miller, Sarah's husband, called 911 in a panic. "I found my wife unresponsive," he shouted into the phone. The operator tried to keep him calm as she dispatched emergency services to their home in a quiet suburban neighborhood known for its safety and friendly community. David claimed he had just returned from his regular early morning jog. When David entered the house, everything seemed normal at first. The smell of coffee from the kitchen lingered in the air, and the kids' toys were scattered around, a usual sight in the Miller household. But as David walked upstairs to their bedroom, he knew something was wrong. The door was slightly ajar, which was unusual. When he pushed it open, he found Sarah lying on the floor near their bed, a pair of panties tied around her neck. She wasn't moving. David rushed to her side, trying to wake her up, but she was unresponsive. He quickly checked for a pulse and, finding none, grabbed his phone to call for help. The Roseville Fire Department and police arrived at the scene within minutes. Roseville is known for its prompt emergency response, and this day was no different. Paramedics rushed upstairs, but soon confirmed the worst. Sarah Miller was dead. David was inconsolable, pacing back and forth in the living room, his hands shaking. He kept muttering, "How could this happen?" over and over. Neighbors soon gathered outside the Miller home, drawn by the flashing lights of the emergency vehicles. News spread quickly in the close-knit community, and by mid-morning, local reporters from the Roseville Press-Tribune and even Sacramento's KCRA3 were on the scene, looking for details about what had happened in one of the city's most peaceful neighborhoods. David, now a suspect, was taken to the police station for questioning. His tear-streaked face and trembling hands made it clear he was in shock. But for the police, this was just the beginning of a complex and tragic investigation into the life and death of Sarah Miller. Sarah Miller was 37 years old and worked as a nurse at Sutter-Roseville Medical Center. She was known for her compassionate and dedicated nature, always putting her patients first. Sarah lived in a charming two-story house in Roseville with her husband, David, and their two children, Mitt, aged 8, and Catcher, aged 5. Sarah graduated from the University of California, Davis, with a degree in nursing. She was well-liked by her classmates and professors, who admired her dedication and drive. After college, she quickly found a job at Sutter-Roseville, where she worked for over a decade. Her colleagues often said she had a special way with patients, always knowing how to comfort and care for them. She was the type of person who would drop everything to help someone in need. In her personal life, Sarah enjoyed simple pleasures. She loved gardening, and her backyard was filled with blooming flowers and plants. She also enjoyed cooking, often trying new recipes from her favorite cooking shows and food blogs. Her kids loved her homemade chocolate chip cookies, a recipe passed down from her grandmother. In the days leading up to her death, Sarah seemed happy and focused on her family and work. She had recently celebrated Mitt's birthday with a small family party. They had cake, played games, and even watched Mitt's favorite movie, The Hangover 2. Sarah had also been working extra shifts at the hospital, helping out during the COVID-19 pandemic. She was always willing to lend a hand, and her dedication did not go unnoticed by her supervisors. Sarah had dreams for the future. She talked about taking a family trip to France once things returned to normal. She also wanted to go back to school to specialize in pediatric nursing, a field she felt passionate about. Her friends and family knew her as a loving mother, a devoted wife, and a true friend. Sarah's tragic death left a huge void in the lives of those who knew and loved her. Her colleagues at the hospital were in shock, and her family was heartbroken. Sarah Miller's life was one of dedication, love, and kindness, and her loss was deeply felt by the Roseville community. The Roseville Police Department responded quickly to the 911 call from David Miller on March 15, 2021. They arrived at the Miller residence within minutes. Leading the investigation was Detective Laura Benedicto, a seasoned investigator known for her meticulous attention to detail. Detective Benedicto, along with her partner, Detective Julian Collins, began examining the scene. The Miller's home, located in a peaceful suburb, was now a crime scene. The bedroom where Sarah Miller was found was in disarray. Clothes were scattered on the floor, and the bed was unmade. A broken picture frame lay near Sarah's body, adding to the chaotic scene. Sarah had been strangled with her own panties, a detail that suggested a crime of passion. Detectives Benedicto and Collins began their investigation by collecting evidence. They dusted for fingerprints, collected DNA samples, and took numerous photographs of the scene. They also interviewed David Miller, who was visibly shaken and distraught. David claimed he had been out jogging and found Sarah when he returned. Despite his grief, detectives noted some inconsistencies in his account. The police brought in forensic experts to assist with the investigation. They used advanced tools and techniques to gather as much information as possible. Forensic scientists examined the broken picture frame and other items in the room for fingerprints and DNA. They also analyzed the Julians on Sarah's neck to determine the force and angle of the strangulation. Every detail was crucial in piecing together what had happened. Detective Benedicto spoke to the neighbors, who were shocked by the news. Roseville was known for its low crime rate, and something like this was almost unheard of. Neighbors reported seeing David go for his morning jog, as he usually did, but no one had seen anything suspicious. One neighbor mentioned hearing raised voices coming from the Miller house the night before, which added a new layer to the investigation. As the day went on, the police continued their work, carefully preserving the crime scene and gathering as much evidence as they could. Detective Benedicto and her team were determined to find out who was responsible for Sarah's death. They worked late into the night, reviewing the evidence and interviewing everyone who might have information. The crime scene was eventually cleared, but the investigation was far from over. Detective Benedicto knew that the key to solving the case lay in the details. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, could be the clue that cracked the case. The Roseville Police Department was committed to finding justice for Sarah Miller and bringing her killer to account. The first suspect in the investigation was David Miller, Sarah's husband. David was 40 years old and worked as a sales executive for a tech company in Sacramento. He was known for his charming and outgoing personality, making him successful in his career. However, behind closed doors, David had been unfaithful of engaging in multiple extramarital affairs. This detail quickly made him a person of interest in the case. David was brought to the police station for questioning. Detective Laura Benedicto and Detective Julian Collins led the interrogation. David appeared distraught and exhausted. He revealed that instead of jogging in Mayhew Park at the time of Sarah's murder, which is what he told the 911 operator and police initially, he was actually having sex with his lover, Emile Rochefort, that morning. David explained that he often went to Emile for sex to clear his mind and deal with stress. Despite his apparent grief, detectives noticed inconsistencies in David's story. When asked about his relationship with Sarah, David described it as strained but loving. He admitted to his affairs, explaining that they were a way to cope with the pressures of work and family life. He seemed sincere, but the detectives were not convinced. During the interrogation, David was asked about his sexual relationship with Emile Rochefort, a 25-year-old personal trainer. David admitted to the affair, but insisted that Emile had nothing to do with Sarah's death. He claimed that Emile was his alibi, as they had been having sex on the morning of the murder. David's calm demeanor and detailed answers raised suspicions among the investigators. They found it odd that he could be so composed given the circumstances. To verify David's alibi, the police contacted Emile Rochefort. Emile confirmed that he and David had been together that morning, but his story also had some inconsistencies. This further complicated the investigation. Detectives Benedicto and Collins decided to dig deeper into David's personal life. They discovered text messages and emails that revealed the extent of his infidelity and his turbulent relationship with Sarah. Neighbors and friends were interviewed, and many described David as charming but sometimes aloof. Some neighbors recalled hearing arguments from the Miller household, especially in recent weeks. This information painted a picture of a marriage under strain, adding to the suspicion surrounding David. Despite his outward calm, David's manipulative and deceitful nature began to emerge. Detectives were now more determined than ever to find out if David's facade of innocence was hiding a darker truth. The investigation into Sarah's death was just beginning, and David Miller remained a key suspect. The second suspect in the investigation was Emile Rochefort, a 25-year-old personal trainer, and David Miller's lover. Emile was a French national known for his attractive looks, fit physique, and confident demeanor. He worked at a high-end gym in Sacramento, popular among the city's elite. Emile was ambitious and driven, often pursuing what he wanted without much regard for others. Detectives Laura Benedicto and Julian Collins brought Emile in for questioning. Emile appeared calm and collected, but his bold personality was evident. He did not shy away from admitting his relationship with David. In fact, he seemed almost proud of it. Emile described how he met David at the gym and how their relationship quickly developed after David made a sexual advance at him in the gym's bathroom. Emile's motive for potentially harming Sarah became a point of interest. Detectives discovered text messages between Emile and David where Emile referred to Sarah in vicious and derogatory terms, calling her an old cow whose milk is already spoiled. This suggested a deep resentment towards Sarah. When asked about these messages, Emile dismissed them as harmless jokes. During the interrogation, Emile claimed that he and David had broken up after he found sexually explicit texts between David and another man named George. Emile explained that he felt betrayed and hurt by David's infidelity. Despite this, he maintained that he had no reason to harm Sarah. He said he was at his apartment alone on the night of the murder. The detectives noted Emile's defensiveness and his quickness to deflect blame onto others. Emile insisted that David was the one with more to lose if Sarah found out about the affairs. He painted a picture of David as a desperate man willing to go to great lengths to protect his secrets. Emile's alibi was weak, and his aggressive attitude during questioning did little to help his case. Detectives continued to press him, but Emile stuck to his story. He repeatedly denied any involvement in Sarah's death, suggesting that the real culprit was David or his mysterious lover George. Despite his confident exterior, Emile's texts and demeanor raised many red flags for the investigators. His willingness to speak negatively about Sarah and his rocky relationship with David added complexity to the case. Detectives Benedicto and Collins knew they needed to gather more evidence before drawing any conclusions. As the investigation progressed, Emile remained a suspect. His bold personality and lack of a solid alibi made him a person of interest. The detectives were determined to uncover the truth and find out who was responsible for Sarah Miller's tragic death. The third suspect in the investigation was George F. Kessler, a close friend of the Miller family. George was 65 years old and a former Olympic skier. He had a quiet demeanor and was known for being friendly and helpful. George often spent time with the Millers and was considered a reliable family friend. Detectives Laura Benedicto and Julian Collins brought George in for questioning. He appeared calm but surprised by the call. George explained that he had known David and Sarah for many years. He described his relationship with them as close and supportive, especially after David confided in him about his marital issues. George's potential motive became clearer during the interrogation. Investigations revealed that George was not just a friend, but also David's current lover and sexual partner. This relationship had been kept secret, adding another layer to the complex web of deceit. George admitted that he and David had recently become romantically involved, which created tension with Sarah. Detectives asked George about his whereabouts on the morning of March 15, 2021. George claimed he was at home, recovering from a recent knee surgery. He provided medical records to support his statement, but the detectives were not fully convinced. They pressed him about his knowledge of David's affairs and Sarah's discovery of them. George's answers were calm and measured, but detectives noticed signs of stress. He admitted that Sarah had confided in him about David's affair with Emile Rochefort. Sarah had discovered the affair just weeks before her death and was gathering evidence to confront David. George knew about Sarah's plans but claimed he had no involvement in her death. Text messages between George and David revealed a complicated relationship. One message from George read, "I can't keep loving you. This has to stop." This indicated that George was deeply involved in the situation and might have felt pressured by David's actions. When confronted with these messages, George became more defensive, insisting that he only wanted to help David and had no motive to harm Sarah. Detectives Benedicto and Collins noted George's jealousy and his complex relationship with the Millers. As a childless bachelor, George might have been envious of the family life David had with Sarah. This envy, coupled with the stress of maintaining this secret relationship with David, raised more questions about his potential involvement. Despite his calm exterior, George's connection to David and his knowledge of Sarah's plans made him a key suspect. The detectives continued to investigate, knowing that every detail could bring them closer to solving the case and uncovering the truth behind Sarah Miller's tragic death. On March 18, 2021, just 3 days after Sarah Miller's tragic death, the weather in Roseville was cloudy with a slight chill in the air. Detective Laura Benedicto received a call from a neighbor who had found something suspicious in a nearby park. The neighbor, an early riser, was walking his dog in Maydew Park when he stumbled upon a small black duffel bag partially hidden under a bush. Detective Benedicto and her team quickly arrived at the scene. The park, usually bustling with joggers and families, was eerily quiet that morning. The duffel bag was carefully examined and opened. Inside, the police found a pair of gloves, a rope, and a smartphone. These items were immediately collected as evidence and sent to the forensic lab for analysis. The police's response to this new evidence was swift and thorough. Forensic experts worked quickly to analyze the contents of the bag. The gloves and rope were tested for fingerprints and DNA, while the smartphone was examined for any data that might provide clues. The phone was a newer model, and after some technical work, the team managed to unlock it. What they found on the smartphone was shocking. Text messages and emails between David Miller and Emile Rochefort were uncovered. The messages included heated exchanges about their relationship and discussions about Sarah. One message from David to Emile read, "We need to figure this out before that bleeping cow finds out everything." This raised new questions about the involvement of both men in Sarah's death. Detective Benedicto was particularly interested in the GPS data from the phone. The record showed that the phone had been in the vicinity of the Miller residence on the morning of the murder, contradicting Emile's claim that he was at his apartment. This evidence was crucial, as it placed Emile closer to the crime scene than he had admitted. The discovery of the duffel bag and its contents provided the detectives with significant new leads. They re-interviewed both David and Emile, confronting them with the new evidence. David continued to deny any involvement, while Emile's confident demeanor began to crack. He became defensive and struggled to explain the incriminating messages and GPS data. Detective Benedicto and her team realized they were getting closer to the truth. The new evidence not only strengthened their suspicions, but also provided a clearer picture of the events leading up to Sarah's death. The investigation intensified as they worked tirelessly, to piece together the puzzle and bring justice to Sarah Miller. On March 20, 2021, the Rosedale Police Department made a breakthrough in the investigation. Detective Laura Benedicto had been reviewing all the evidence collected, including the text messages, DNA results, and alibis. A key piece of evidence was a strand of hair found on the rope used to strangle Sarah. The DNA analysis matched David Miller's profile. Detectives Benedicto and Julian Collins pieced together the timeline of events. They discovered that David had learned about Sarah's intention to file for divorce after finding out about his affair with Emile Rochefort. David feared losing his family and reputation, which drove him to a desperate act. The detectives also revisited the GPS data from the smartphone found in the duffel bag. It showed that David had been near the Miller residence during the time he claimed to be jogging. This contradicted his alibi and placed him at the scene of the crime. With the mounting evidence, the detectives were confident they had their murderer. On the morning of March 21, 2021, the police arrived at the Miller residence. David was in the kitchen, making breakfast for his children. He was calm, but the detectives noticed a slight tremor in his hands. When Detective Benedicto informed David that he was under arrest for the murder of his wife, his face turned pale. He tried to protest, but the evidence was overwhelming. David was handcuffed and taken into custody. As he was led away, neighbors watched in shock. David's reaction was a mix of disbelief and resignation. He did not struggle, knowing that his attempts to cover up his crime had failed. The arrest was a turning point in the case, bringing some relief to the community. Sarah's family was informed about the arrest. They were heartbroken, but also relieved that the person responsible for her death was finally caught. Sarah's parents expressed their gratitude to the police for their diligent work. Mitt and Catcher, Sarah's children, were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they were surrounded by family and friends who offered support. David's arrest was covered extensively in the local news. The Roseville community, known for its safety, was shaken by the tragic event. The case highlighted the dark side of seemingly perfect lives and the length some people would go to protect their secrets. As David sat in his cell, awaiting trial, the detectives continued to gather evidence to ensure a strong case against him. The arrest was just the beginning of the journey toward justice for Sarah Miller. The police were determined to see the case through to its conclusion, providing closure for Sarah's family and the community. David Miller's trial began on March 25, 2021, in the Placer County Courthouse. The courtroom was filled with reporters and community members eager to hear the details of the case. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Sarah Quinns-Bronsel, known for her strong, no-nonsense approach. Quinns-Bronsel presented the case with a clear and compelling argument, outlining how David had killed his wife, Sarah Miller. Quinns-Bronsel emphasized the evidence against David, including the DNA found on the rope, the inconsistent alibis, and the text messages revealing David's affair and his desperation to keep his secrets hidden. She described Sarah as a loving mother and devoted nurse, whose life was tragically cut short by someone she trusted. Quinns-Bronsel argued that David's fear of losing his family and reputation drove him to commit murder. David's defense attorney, Michael Brooks, was a seasoned lawyer known for his persuasive skills. Brooks argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no direct proof linking David to the crime scene. He suggested that the real culprit could be Emile Rochefort or George S. Kessler. Trying to shift the blame away from David, Brooks painted David as a grieving husband caught in a complex situation, insisting that the emotional turmoil might have influenced his actions but did not prove his guilt. Throughout the trial, Sarah's family, including her parents Mike and Linda Thompson, sat in the courtroom, their faces a mix of sadness and hope. They watched closely as the case unfolded, hoping for justice for their daughter. The emotional weight of the trial was evident, with Sarah's parents often seen wiping away tears as the evidence was presented. On March 30, 2021, after several days of testimony and closing arguments, the jury deliberated and reached a verdict. David Miller was found guilty of first-degree murder. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. While there was relief that justice was served, the trial had taken an emotional toll on everyone involved. The sentencing took place on April 2, 2021. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in a stern but compassionate tone, expressed sorrow for the loss of Sarah and the impact on her family. David's reaction was subdued. He showed little emotion as the sentence was pronounced, reflecting a sense of resignation rather than surprise. Sarah's family felt a sense of closure, though the pain of losing her remained. The trial had been a difficult journey, but the verdict provided some measure of justice. The trial's outcome underscored the community's commitment to ensuring that such tragedies were met with accountability, while also emphasizing the need for continued support and healing for those affected. After David Miller's conviction, life slowly began to return to normal for everyone involved. Sarah Miller's family faced a long road to healing. Her parents dedicated their time to taking care of Mitt and Catcher. They sought counseling to help deal with their grief and support the children through the loss of their mother and the incarceration of their father. Detective Laura Benedicto continued her work with the Roseville Police Department. The Sarah Miller case had been one of the most challenging of her career, but it also reinforced her commitment to seeking justice. Her partner, Detective Julian Collins, was promoted to surgeon, recognizing his contributions to solving the case. Both detectives received commendations for their work. Emile Rochefort, David's former lover, moved back to France. The publicity and stress of the trial had taken a toll on him. He decided to start fresh, leaving behind the painful memories of his relationship with David. Emile continued his career as a personal trainer, finding success in a new city. George S. Kessler, who had been a close friend to the Miller family and another of David's lovers, distanced himself from the scandal. He retired from public life, focusing on personal reflection and maintaining a low profile. The trial had brought unwanted attention to his past, and he preferred to live quietly. David Miller, now serving a life sentence without parole, faced the reality of his actions. In prison, he attended counseling sessions and participated in rehabilitation programs. However, the betrayal of his family and friends left a permanent Julian on him. He expressed remorse in letters to Sarah's family, but the damage was irreparable. Sarah's legacy lived on through the lives she touched. The memorial fund in her name helped many nursing students achieve their dreams, embodying her spirit of compassion and dedication. The case was a stark reminder of the hidden turmoil that can exist behind closed doors and the importance of seeking justice and truth. Sarah Miller's life was cut short by the very person she trusted the most. As we remember her, let us also remember the importance of honesty and the unbreakable bonds of family and friendship. Valerie Camden, a 41-year-old woman from Knoxville, Tennessee, was well known in her community. She owned a successful pool supply store, Valerie's Pools, which many locals trusted for their pool needs. Valerie was known for her bright and cheerful personality. She always had a smile on her face and was dedicated to helping her customers. Valerie had a strong educational background, having graduated from the University of Tennessee with a degree in business administration. She applied her knowledge and skills to make her store a beloved local business. Valerie's personal life was challenging but inspiring. In her early 20s, she went through a difficult divorce and became a single mother to her triplets, Ethan, Nathan, and Alan, all of whom are deaf. Despite the financial strain, Valerie worked tirelessly to provide for her children. She faced a significant debt to provide for them, but she never let it dampen her spirit. Valerie was a loving mother who supported her children in every way possible. She was actively involved in the deaf community, advocating for better resources and opportunities for children with disabilities. In the days leading up to her death in November 2018, Valerie was excited about the upcoming Thanksgiving holiday. She planned to host a big family dinner and had already started preparing. Valerie was also working on expanding her business, hoping to open a second store in the next town over. She dreamed of providing better financial stability for her family and giving back to the community that supported her. Valerie had a close-knit group of friends and was known to frequent local spots like Starbucks and the local Waller. Her friends described her as kind-hearted and always ready to lend a helping hand. She was involved in various community activities, including volunteering at the local food bank and participating in charity events. Valerie's dedication extended beyond her family and business. She was a passionate advocate for other single mothers, especially those raising children with disabilities. She often spoke at local events and used her story to inspire others. Valerie's dreams were big, and her heart was even bigger. She hoped to create a foundation to support single mothers and provide scholarships for children with disabilities. Valerie Camden was a remarkable woman whose life, though filled with challenges, was a testament to strength, love, and determination. However, her brutal murder would erase all those achievements in the mind of Knoxville for years to come. On the morning of November 22, 2018, Thanksgiving Day, Knoxville was unusually cold and overcast. At around 8:30 a.m., Ethan Camden, one of Valerie's 19-year-old deaf triplets, made a horrifying discovery. Ethan, who had just woken up, went to check on his mom. He found Valerie's lifeless body in the master bathroom of their home. She was naked and strangled with a rope in the shower. Ethan was in shock. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. His hands trembled, and he felt frozen in place. After a few moments, he snapped out of his daze and ran to get his brothers, Nathan and Alan. The three of them stood there, stunned and scared, not knowing what to do. Nathan, who had more hearing and had better speaking skills than the other triplets, grabbed the phone and called 911. His voice was shaky as he tried to explain the situation. "My mom. She's in the bathroom. She's not moving," he cried, his voice almost unintelligible. The 911 operator tried to calm him down and give more details. Within minutes, the police and emergency responders were on their way. When the first responders arrived, they were met with a heart-wrenching scene. The triplets were huddled together, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. Officer Jane Miller was the first to enter the bathroom. She had been with the Knoxville Police Department for over 15 years and thought she had seen it all. But the sight of Valerie's lifeless body left her speechless. She took a deep breath and called for backup. As more officers arrived, they began to secure the crime scene. They immediately noticed the cleanliness of the bathroom, except for the signs of a struggle. There were no obvious fingerprints or signs of forced entry. While the police worked inside, the triplets were taken outside and given blankets to keep warm. The neighbors started to gather, whispering among themselves. Local news channels, including WBIR-TV, arrived to cover the breaking news. Reporters tried to get statements from the police and neighbors, but everyone was too shocked to say much. Ethan, Nathan, and Alan were taken to the police station to give their statements. They were still in a state of shock, struggling to understand what had happened. The police knew they had to act quickly to find out who was responsible for this horrific crime. When the Knoxville Police Department arrived at the Camden home on November 22, 2018, it was around 9:00 a.m. The sky was overcast, and the cold air hinted at the coming winter. Officers moved quickly to secure the area and keep onlookers away. Detective Catherine Bernard and Officer Dangle Ford led the investigation. They were known for their thorough and methodical work. Detective Bernard first spoke with Ethan, Nathan, and Alan Camden, who were still visibly shaken. She gently asked them to describe what happened, and then sent them to the station for detailed statements. Her primary focus now was on the crime scene. The master bathroom, where Valerie Camden's body was found, was eerily clean. Valerie lay naked in the shower, strangled with a rope. The scene suggested a struggle, but there were no signs of forced entry, and the rest of the house was undisturbed. Detective Bernard noted that this indicated the killer was someone Valerie knew and trusted. Detective Bernard and Officer Ford examined the bathroom carefully. The rope used to strangle Valerie was a simple, sturdy type, the kind you might find at a hardware store like Home Depot, known worldwide as America's friendliest big box store. They collected fingerprints from various surfaces, including the shower and door handles. The crime scene unit used luminol to detect any traces of blood that might have been cleaned up. Outside the house, the police set up perimeter. Neighbors gathered, whispering about the tragedy. Local news stations like WBIR-TV and the Knoxville News Sentinel sent reporters to cover the story. The media presence added pressure on the police to find answers quickly. Detective Bernard called in a forensic team to assist with the investigation. They photographed the scene, collected samples, and searched for any overlooked clues. The team also checked for surveillance footage from nearby homes and businesses, hoping to find any suspicious activity. The police interviewed the Camden family's neighbors. One neighbor mentioned she saw a car she didn't recognize parked near the Camden house the night before. She couldn't recall the make or model but thought it was dark-colored. Another neighbor said he heard arguing coming from the Camden home earlier in the week, but he thought it was just a typical family disagreement you might hear around Thanksgiving. As the investigation continued, Detective Bernard and her team worked around the clock. They reviewed Valerie's phone records, emails, and social media accounts. They wanted to understand her relationships and any possible motives for her murder. The clean crime scene, the lack of forced entry, and the methodical nature of the murder pointed to a calculated and deliberate act. Detective Bernard knew this was just the beginning. They needed to dig deeper into Valerie's life and those closest to her to uncover the truth. Brett Camden, Valerie's 61-year-old second husband, was the first person the police investigated. Brett was an investment fund manager well known in Knoxville's financial circles. Outwardly, he seemed like a loving and supportive husband, but the police had to look deeper. Brett was at work when the police contacted him about Valerie's death. He appeared shocked and distraught, immediately driving to the police station. Detective Bernard met with him in a quiet room, where he slumped into a chair, his face pale. Brett explained that he had left for work early that morning and had no idea what happened to Valerie. He described their marriage as happy, but admitted they had their share of arguments, mostly about money. Valerie was in significant debt, around $200,000, due to the cost of raising her deaf triplets as a single mother. Brett said he tried to help, but it was a constant source of stress. The police asked Brett about his relationship with the triplets. He claimed to care for them deeply, even though he wasn't their biological father. Detective Bernard noted his calm and composed demeanor, but she also sensed he was hiding something. Brett's colleagues at his investment firm described him as a hard worker but very controlling. Some even mentioned he could be manipulative. This raised red flags for Detective Bernard. She dug deeper into Brett's personal life, interviewing friends and neighbors. Rumors surfaced that behind closed doors, Brett was not as loving as he appeared. Some neighbors said they heard loud arguments coming from the Camden house. One of Valerie's friends mentioned that Valerie once showed her a bird mark on her arm, which she claimed Brett had caused with a fireplace poker. The police brought Brett back for further questioning. This time, he seemed more nervous. Detective Bernard asked him directly about the bird marks and the rumors of him being controlling. Brett's calm facade cracked. He denied everything, but his voice was shaky. He insisted that he loved Valerie and would never hurt her. To confirm Brett's alibi, the police reviewed security footage from his office building. It showed Brett arriving at work at 7:00 a.m. as he claimed. However, there was a gap of about 30 minutes when Brett's whereabouts were unaccounted for. With more questions than answers, the police kept Brett under close watch. They needed more evidence to determine if Brett was involved in Valerie's murder. The investigation was far from over. Ethan Camden, one of Valerie's 19-year-old deaf triplets, was the second person the police investigated. Ethan had recently graduated from a school for the deaf and dreamed of becoming a graphic designer. However, he had struggled to find a job and had turned to drugs to cope with the stress and chaos at home. Ethan was known for his shy and reserved nature, often escaping into his art. When the police brought Ethan in for questioning, he looked scared and confused. Detective Bernard communicated with him through a sign language interpreter. She asked Ethan about his relationship with his mother and stepfather. Ethan described his mother as loving and supportive, but his feelings toward Brett were more complicated. He admitted that Brett was controlling and sometimes abusive, but he was too afraid to say anything more. Ethan had a weak alibi for the morning of Valerie's murder. He said he was at home, asleep in his room, but there were no witnesses to confirm this. Detective Bernard asked him about his drug use, and Ethan confessed to using marijuana to deal with his anxiety. He insisted that he would never hurt his mother, tears streaming down his face as he signed his responses. The police searched Ethan's room and found drug paraphernalia, but nothing that directly connected him to Valerie's murder. They also reviewed his social media accounts and phone records, looking for any clues. Ethan's online activity showed a young man struggling with his emotions, but not someone planning a murder. Detective Bernard interviewed Ethan's friends from deaf school. They described him as talented and quiet, often keeping to himself. Some friends mentioned that Ethan had talked about his stepfather's harsh behavior, but never hinted at any violent intentions. The investigation revealed that Ethan had been under immense pressure. The family's financial troubles, combined with the abuse he saw from Brett against his mother, had taken a toll on him. Detective Bernard considered Ethan a potential suspect due to his weak alibi and emotional turmoil, but she needed more concrete evidence. As the police continued to dig into Ethan's background, they found no solid proof linking him to the crime. Detective Bernard's intuition told her that Ethan was more of a victim in this situation, trapped in a toxic household. The focus of the investigation began to shift away from Ethan as new leads emerged. In late November 2018, the investigation into Valerie Camden's murder led the police to a third suspect, Nathan Camden, one of Valerie's triplets. Nathan, 19, was a star athlete on his deaf school's basketball team. His coaches often praised his dedication and talent. Nathan was outgoing, popular, and well-liked by his peers, but he struggled under the pressure of his stepfather's expectations and his need for approval. Nathan dreamed of playing basketball professionally. He had posters of NBA stars like LeBron James and Steph Curry on his bedroom walls. His friends saw him as cheerful and friendly, but those closer to him knew about the stress and fear he faced due to Brett's behavior. Detective Catherine Bernard and her team decided to bring Nathan in for questioning. On a crisp, cold morning in late November, they'd met Nathan at the police station.
Through a sign language interpreter, Nathan shared his side of the story. He appeared nervous but cooperative with the investigators. Nathan explained that his relationship with Brett had always been strained. Brett's controlling nature and high expectations had caused Nathan significant stress. Brett often belittled him for not having six-pack abs, comparing him unfavorably to his brothers and looks. During the interrogation, Nathan revealed more about Brett's abusive behavior. He recounted instances where Brett had used threats and manipulation to control him and his brothers. Nathan's testimony painted a clearer picture of the toxic environment they had been living in. The police scrutinized Nathan's alibi for the night of Valerie's murder. Nathan claimed he had been at another deaf friend's house, watching the Tennessee Volunteers game on TV. His friend confirmed this alibi, and surveillance footage from a local convenience store showed Nathan and his friend buying snacks during the game. Despite Nathan's cooperation, the police needed more evidence to eliminate him as a suspect. They continued to investigate, analyzing phone records, messages, and other digital footprints. Throughout the day, the police worked diligently to gather all possible evidence from the crime scene to see if Nathan might be the killer. They knew that solving this case would require piecing together the puzzle of Valerie's fraught family relationships.
On a chilly Saturday morning of November 24, 2018, a breakthrough came when a neighbor discovered a hidden USB drive in her attic while cleaning. Suspecting it didn't belong to her, she promptly contacted the authorities. Detective Bernard and Officer Daniel Ford responded swiftly, retrieving the USB drive from her home. Back at the police station, forensic experts examined the flash drive and found several video files. When they played the videos, they were horrified. The recordings showed Valerie's triplets, Ethan, Nathan, and Alan, undressing and performing suggestive dances while naked, some with quite complex choreography based on that of K-pop boy bands, both individually and as a group. The videos were addressed to someone named Jonathan, incidentally Brett's middle name. Detective Bernard felt sick as she watched the footage, vomiting profusely into a nearby trash can. It was clear that the triplets were being manipulated into a sexual relationship with someone, most likely Brett Cambin, their stepfather. The police felt confident the videos revealed Brett Cambin's dark secret. The police immediately brought Ethan, Nathan, and Alan back in for questioning. With the help of a sign language interpreter, the triplets shared their story. They explained how Brett had manipulated them for the past year into sexual relationships, pitting them against each other in various sex games with promises of more time spent with him for the winner. They said they had no idea there was anything wrong with that. Searching Brett's home office, the police discovered additional hidden USB drives containing sex tapes and a journal detailing Brett's disturbing relations with the triplets. In it, he detailed his secret relationship with the triplets, including graphic description of his sex games, and referring to the triplets as his boy harem. Detective Bernard knew this new evidence was crucial. It not only implicated Brett and Valerie's murder, but also uncovered a deeper level of abuse. With this new evidence, the police had a clearer picture of Brett's possible motive. Had he killed Valerie to keep his dark secrets hidden? Police knew Valerie would have planned to leave him and take the triplets with her if she found out. Could Brett, afraid of losing control and facing exposure, have decided to silence Valerie forever? As November 2018 drew to a close, the Knoxville police made a breakthrough in the Valerie Camden murder case. After weeks of investigation, the evidence pointed clearly to Brett Cambin, Valerie's husband. Brett, 61, worked as an investment fund manager. Outwardly, he appeared to be a supportive and loving spouse, but the evidence painted a horrifyingly different picture. Brett was controlling and manipulative. He used threats and even physical violence to keep Valerie under his control. Even worse, the police uncovered a twisted and abusive sexual relationship between Brett and the triplets. He referred to them as his boy harem, exploiting their vulnerability and deafness to maintain his dominance. Detective Catherine Bernard and her team had pieced together Brett's motive for killing Valerie. Valerie had tired of his abuse and planned to lead Brett and take the triplets with her. Brett, afraid of losing his control and having his dark secrets exposed, decided to silence her forever. On the morning of November 30, 2018, with clear skies and a chilly breeze, the police moved in to arrest Brett Cambin. They arrived at his upscale home in Knoxville's affluent neighborhood. Brett was taken by surprise when the officers, led by Detective Bernard, knocked on his door. He tried to maintain his composure, but it was evident he was shocked. Brett was handcuffed and read his rights. He showed little emotion, maintaining a cold and distant demeanor. As he was escorted to the police car, Neighbors watched in disbelief. The arrest was a stark contrast to the facade Brett had maintained for so long. Valerie's family, especially her triplets, were relieved but emotionally shattered. They had lived in fear and manipulation for years. The news of Brett's arrest brought a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and anger. They hoped for justice and a chance to heal from the trauma they had endured. Detective Bernard was determined to ensure Brett faced the full consequences of his actions. She knew the case against him was strong, with the evidence gathered from the hidden USB drives, his journal, and the testimonies of the triplets. Brett's arrest marked a significant turning point in the investigation. The police had not only solved Valerie's murder, but also uncovered the horrifying abuse her family suffered under. The arrest of Brett Camden marked a significant step in the process, bringing closure to Valerie's grieving family and friends. The trial of Brett Camden began in early December 2018, just as the Knoxville community was preparing for the holiday season. The courtroom was packed with reporters and spectators, all eager to hear the details of the case that had shocked the city. The prosecutor, Mark Schwartzel, a 45-year-old with a reputation for being tough on crime, laid out a compelling case against Brett. He detailed Brett's abusive behavior, the manipulation of the triplets, and the cold-blooded murder of Valerie Camden. Thompson presented the videos found on the USB drives, Brett's journal, and the testimonies of Ethan, Nathan, and Alan. The evidence painted a clear picture of Brett's guilt. On the defense side, attorney Lizandra Martinez, 50, known for her tenacity in defending difficult cases, argued that Brett was a loving husband and stepfather who had been wrongly accused. She tried to cast doubt on the triplets' testimonies, suggesting they were influenced by their desire to see Brett punished. However, the overwhelming evidence made it difficult for her to build a strong defense. Throughout the trial, Valerie's family sat in the front row, visibly emotional. The triplets, now free from Brett's control, bravely testified about the abuse they had endured. Their courage moved everyone in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with a verdict. On December 15, 2018, Brett Camden was found guilty of first-degree murder and multiple counts of abuse. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brett showed little reaction as the verdict was read, maintaining his cold and distant demeanor. The sentencing brought a sense of relief to Valerie's family, but the pain of losing her was still raw. Valerie's sister, Susan, expressed mixed feelings outside the courthouse. "We're grateful for justice, but nothing will bring Valerie back. Our focus now is on helping the boys heal and move forward." The trial's conclusion marked the end of a dark chapter for Valerie's family and the beginning of their journey toward healing. The community rallied around them, offering support and solidarity in the aftermath of their ordeal. After the trial ended in December 2018, life slowly began to move forward for those involved in the Valerie Camden case. The Knoxville community, still shocked by the revelations, came together to support Valerie's triplets, Ethan, Nathan, and Alan. Local organizations, like the Knoxville Center for the Deaf, offered resources and counseling to help them heal. Ethan, the aspiring graphic designer, found solace in his art. He received support from the local art community and even had some of his work displayed at a gallery downtown. He began taking classes at the University of Tennessee, determined to build a future in graphic design despite the trauma he had endured. Nathan, the star athlete, returned to basketball. His teammates and coaches at his deaf school rallied around him, offering encouragement and support. He continued to excel on the court, using the sport as an outlet for his emotions. Nathan also received several college scholarship offers, giving him hope for a brighter future. Alan, the third triplet, focused on his studies. He was always the quietest of the three, but with the support of his friends and family, he began to come out of his shell. He joined a local support group for victims of abuse, where he found comfort in sharing his experiences with others who had faced similar situations. Detective Catherine Bernard, who had led the investigation, was commended for her dedication and thorough work on the case. The Knoxville Police Department recognized her with a special award, and she continued to serve the community with the same commitment and integrity. Brett Camden, now serving a life sentence without parole, had little to say about his conviction. Reports from the prison indicated that he remained isolated and unrepentant. His arrest and trial had stripped away the facade of respectability he had maintained for so long. Valerie's sister, Susan, took on a more active role in the triplets' lives. She became their legal guardian and worked tirelessly to provide a stable and loving home for them. The community's support helped her navigate the challenges of raising three traumatized teenagers. The case left a lasting impact on Knoxville, reminding everyone of the importance of vigilance and support for those in abusive situations. As the triplets began to rebuild their lives, they carried with them the memory of their mother and the hope for a better future. The case of Valerie Camden's murder is a haunting reminder of the hidden darkness that can lurk behind closed doors. Her strength and resilience continue to inspire those who knew her, while the justice served ensures that her tragic story will not be forgotten. Edith Palmer Delamere was a 70-year-old woman who led a life that many would describe as anything but ordinary. Born in Zambia to British parents, Edie grew up surrounded by the wild beauty of Africa. She eventually moved to London, where she became a model during the swinging 60s, a time when the city was the epicenter of fashion and culture. Her modeling career brought her into contact with celebrities, artists, and the elite of society. But Edie wasn't content to stay in one place. She married 4 times, each marriage more extravagant than the last, before settling down in Boynton Beach, Florida, a sunny retirement community with an average age of 62 and known for its relaxed atmosphere. Edie was a wealthy divorcee with a reputation for being a bridezilla. She had a taste for the finer things in life, whether it was her collection of designer clothes, her flashy jewelry, or her love for Bentleys. Despite her age, Edie was obsessed with youth. She spent a small fortune on cosmetic procedures to maintain her appearance and often surrounded herself with younger people, particularly men who she would entertain sexually. Her vanity was well known in Boynton Beach, no small thing, where she was often seen in the area's many high-end boutiques and beauty salons. Edie had one child, Leila Palmer Delamere, but their relationship was strained at best. Edie's controlling nature and obsession with her looks made it difficult for Leila to connect with her mother. Leila had spent years living on her own, studying Zen Buddhism in Japan, far away from Edie's shadow. When they reconnected in late 2012, the reunion was rocky. Edie, who was planning her 5th wedding to a much younger man named Rick Lasker, and was more focused on her upcoming nuptials than on mending her relationship with Leila, who she privately said was, quote, an ugly little piglet. In the days leading up to her death, Edie was busy preparing for her wedding, which was to be a grand affair. She spent hours at the spa, getting treatments to ensure she looked her best, and shopped for the perfect wedding dress at high-end stores like Saks Fifth Avenue. But beneath the surface, Edie's life was far from perfect. Her obsession with youth and control over those around her had created deep rifts that, unknown to her, would end in her murder. On the morning of January 15, 2013, Boynton Beach was bathed in the warm glow of the Florida sun, a typical winter day for the quiet retirement community. But inside the upscale home of Edie Palmer Delamere, something was terribly wrong. At around 9:30 a.m., Leila Palmer Delamere arrived at her mother's house, planning to discuss last-minute details for the upcoming wedding. When she entered the home, she immediately noticed how eerily quiet it was. No music playing from Edie's vintage record collection, no sounds of her bustling about. Leila felt a knot form in her stomach. Leila called out to her mother, but there was no response. Growing more anxious, she walked upstairs to Edie's lavish bedroom, a room filled with expensive furniture and walls adorned with photos from her glamorous past. What she found next was the stuff of nightmares. Edie was lying in her king-size bed, naked and lifeless. Her face, which had once been the picture of beauty and youth, was now a haunting sight. She had been shot, and in a gruesome twist, her eyes had been viciously poked out with a ballpoint pen. The shock hit Leila hard. She stood frozen, staring at the horrific scene. Then, in a panic, she grabbed her iPhone and dialed 911, her hands trembling as she struggled to explain what she had just discovered. What the bleep? My mother's bleeping dead. There's blood bleeping everywhere. Gross. Leila's voice was filled with terror and disbelief as she described the scene to the emergency operator. The police arrived within minutes, their sirens piercing the peaceful morning air of the neighborhood. Officers from the Boynton Beach Police Department quickly entered the home, securing the area and instructing Leila to wait outside. Paramedics were close behind, but it was clear there was nothing they could do. Edie was already gone. As Leila stood outside the house, trying to process what had just happened, neighbors began to gather, whispering among themselves, their faces a mix of shock and concern. In a community where the biggest news was usually a neighbor's new Ferrari or an upcoming all-night orgy, the discovery of a brutal murder was unimaginable. Leela was left to grapple with the horrifying reality that her mother was dead, and the question on everyone's mind was, who could have done something so terrible, so brutal? The Boynton Beach Police Department was quick to respond to the scene after Leela Palmer Delamere's frantic 911 call on the morning of January 15, 2013. Detective Gregor Harbinski, a seasoned investigator with over 2 decades of experience, led the team. Harbinski was known for his calm demeanor and sharp eye for detail, qualities that would prove essential in this grisly case. As they arrived at Edie Palmer Delamere's luxurious home, the officers were met with a scene of disturbing violence. The crime scene was nothing short of a nightmare. Edie's bedroom, once a place of opulence, was now the site of a brutal murder. The king-size bed, adorned with satin sheets, was soaked in blood. Edie's lifeless body lay in the center, naked, with a gunshot wound to her chest. But what shocked the officers most were her eyes, brutally poked out of her like a sunny-side-up egg with a ballpoint pen. The sheer brutality of the act pointed to a deep-seated rage, suggesting the killer harbored intense hatred toward Edie. Detective Harbinski and his team began their investigation with a thorough examination of the room. They carefully bagged and tagged evidence, including the blood-stained pen, which was still lying on the floor near the bed. The crime scene unit photographed the room from every angle, capturing the horror in vivid detail. The team also dusted for fingerprints, though the presence of Edie's many sexual visitors and household staff over the years made the task more challenging. Outside, Leela sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket provided by a neighbor, her eyes red from crying. Harbinski knew she would need to be questioned, but first, he wanted to ensure the crime scene was meticulously processed. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. The method of murder and the mutilation of the victim's eyes suggested that the killer was someone who knew Edie well, someone with a personal vendetta. Given the brutal nature of the crime, Detective Harbinski contacted the FBI to bring in a criminal profiler. Dr. Camila Kapoor, a renowned psychologist specializing in violent crimes, was called to assist. After reviewing the crime scene and speaking with Harbinski, Dr. Kapoor developed a psychological profile of the killer. She believed the murderer was likely someone close to Edie, possibly a family member or one of her many sexual partners. The killer was driven by jealousy, resentment, and an overwhelming need to assert control over Edie. The act of gouging out her eyes indicated a desire to erase Edie's gaze, perhaps stemming from feelings of inadequacy or a fear of judgment. Dr. Kapoor's profile added a new layer to the investigation. It suggested that the person responsible for this horrific act was not just a cold-blooded killer, but someone deeply disturbed with a complex emotional relationship to the victim. With this new insight, the police turned their attention to those closest to Edie, determined to uncover the identity of the murderer. The police quickly focused their investigation on Leela Palmer Delamere, Edie's estranged daughter. At 34 years old, Leela had spent much of her life living in the shadow of her glamorous and demanding mother. After returning from Japan, where she had been studying Zen Buddhism for several years, Leela had hoped to find some peace, but reconnecting with Edie only seemed to reopen old wounds. Their relationship was strained at best, with Edie constantly criticizing Leela for being ugly and not living up to her standards. Leela had been struggling financially since her return to the U.S. She lived in a modest apartment in West Palm Beach and worked part-time at a local yoga studio, earning just enough to get by. She was known to be quiet and reserved, often keeping to herself. But beneath that calm exterior, those who knew Leela sensed a deep sadness and frustration. Friends noted that Leela was increasingly anxious in the months leading up to her mother's death, and she often spoke about feeling trapped and powerless in her life. The police believed that Leela had a strong motive for wanting Edie out of her life. Years of emotional abuse and feeling overshadowed by her mother's larger-than-life personality could have driven Leela to the breaking point. Moreover, the discovery that her mother was having an affair with her much younger boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, would have been the ultimate betrayal. The police theorized that Leela might have seen the murder as her only way to escape Edie's control and humiliation. Detective Gregor Harbinski brought Leela in for questioning just 2 days after the murder. During the interrogation, Leela appeared nervous but composed. She denied any involvement in her mother's death, stating that she had been at home alone chanting sutras at the time of the murder. However, her alibi was weak, with no witnesses to confirm her whereabouts. The detectives pressed her on her relationship with Edie, particularly her feelings about the affair with Jake, but Leela remained tight-lipped, refusing to engage with their line of questioning.
Leela's behavior during the interrogation raised red flags for the investigators. She seemed detached, almost cold, when discussing her mother's death, which they found unusual for someone who had just lost a parent. However, there was no physical evidence directly linking Leela to the crime, and despite their suspicions, the police knew they needed more to build a solid case against her. As the investigation continued, Leela remained a prime suspect, but the lack of concrete evidence meant that the police would have to keep digging. They hoped that further examination of the crime scene and interviews with other people in Edie's life would uncover the truth behind this brutal murder. The investigation into the murder of Edie Palmer Delamere next led the police to Jake DeCastro, an 18-year-old with quite the complicated life. Jake, an undocumented immigrant from Argentina, had been living in Boynton Beach for several months by January 2013. He worked odd jobs, including landscaping and dishwashing, earning just enough to get by. Despite his rough circumstances, Jake was known for his charm, particularly with women, and his good looks made him a local heartthrob among the area's many old and sexually frustrated rich women. Jake's relationship with Leela Palmer Delamere, Edie's daughter, was complex. Lila, 16 years older, had taken the vulnerable young Jake in, providing him with a place to stay, some money every now and then, and protection from immigration authorities. In return, Jake offered sex, although he saw the relationship as more transactional than romantic. Jake's dreams were modest. He wanted to build a stable life in America, perhaps save enough money to start his own stand selling empanadas by the beach one day. But his immigration status made everything uncertain. Edie Palmer Delamere's blatant sexual interest in Jake added another layer of tension. According to those who knew them, Edie had developed a lurid fascination with the young man. She was known for her attraction to hot younger men, and Jake was no exception. She had reportedly lavished him with gifts, including Rolex watches and an Armani suit, and had hinted at a future together if he dumped her daughter for her. For Jake, this was a tempting offer. Edie was much wealthier than Leela, and a relationship with her could mean a life he had never imagined, and perhaps even that empanada stand. When the police brought Jake in for questioning, they found him nervous and evasive. He avoided direct answers, often shifting the conversation away from his relationship with Leela. He did, however, admit to having a sexual relationship with Edie, but claimed it was purely physical and that he had never had any love for her, intended to pursue her as long as she would give him things. Jake insisted that he had been with friends on the night of the murder, drinking at a local cantina, but his alibi was weak, with no one able to confirm his whereabouts for the entire evening. The detectives were suspicious of Jake's motives. They knew he had a lot to gain from Edie's death, especially if she had promised him a share of her substantial wealth. But as they pressed him further, Jake remained calm, though clearly uncomfortable. He denied any involvement in Edie's murder, repeatedly stating that he had no reason to harm her. The police, however, weren't convinced. They believed Jake might have been desperate enough to commit the crime, hoping to secure a future that had always seemed out of reach. Despite their suspicions, the police couldn't find any physical evidence linking Jake to the murder. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, and no witnesses placing him at the scene. Jake DeCastro remained a person of interest. But without more concrete evidence, the investigators knew they needed to look elsewhere for answers. The investigation into Edie Palmer Delamere's murder also pointed the police toward Rick Lasker, Edie's 45-year-old fiancé. Rick was a local businessman who had met Edie at a charity event in late 2012. Their whirlwind romance quickly led to an engagement, despite their significant 25-year age difference. Friends and neighbors in Boynton Beach described Rick as a man with a charming exterior, but those who knew him better often spoke of his quick temper and financial troubles. Rick had been struggling to keep his business afloat. He owned a small chain of used car dealerships across South Florida, but by January 2013, the business was bleeding money. The recession that had rocked the U.S. economy a few years earlier still had lingering effects, and Rick was desperate for a financial lifeline. When he met Edie, a wealthy widow with a substantial savings and an insatiable sexual hunger for men, it seemed like his problems were over. But their relationship was far from smooth. Despite planning a wedding, Rick and Edie had a contentious relationship. Edie was known for her controlling behavior, often treating Rick more like an employee or sex slave than a partner. The couple frequently argued, especially over the prenuptial agreement Edie insisted on. She wanted to protect her fortune, while Rick, already drowning in debt, saw the prenup as a potential barrier to financial security.
Their disagreements became so intense that neighbors reported hearing shouting matches from Edie's home in the days leading up to her death. When the police brought Rick in for questioning, he appeared calm but guarded. He denied any involvement in Edie's murder, claiming that despite their arguments, he genuinely loved her. Rick provided an alibi for the night of the murder, stating that he had been entertaining potential business partners at a strip club in Miami. However, when detectives checked his alibi, they found inconsistencies. The meeting he mentioned was real, but it had ended hours before Edie was killed, leaving a significant gap in Rick's timeline. The police were particularly interested in Rick's potential motive. Edie's wealth was a powerful incentive, especially given Rick's financial woes. If she had died before the wedding, Rick stood to gain nothing due to the prenup. But if he could somehow make her death look like an accident or orchestrate it in a way that benefited him, Rick could walk away with a substantial inheritance. As detectives pressed Rick on these points, his calm demeanor began to crack. He became defensive, insisting that his financial problems were under control and that he had no reason to harm Edie. But the police weren't convinced. They knew Rick had a lot to lose if the marriage didn't go through, and they suspected he might have been willing to take drastic measures to secure his future. Despite their suspicions, the police didn't have enough evidence to charge Rick with the murder. However, his shaky alibi and financial motives kept him firmly in their sights as they continued the investigation. On the morning of January 24, 2013, Boynton Beach was experiencing one of its rare chilly days, with temperatures dipping into the 50s. It was during this unusual cold spell that a significant breakthrough occurred in the investigation of Edie Palmer Delamere's murder. Detective Karen Martins, who had been tirelessly combing through Edie's personal effects, discovered something unusual in Edie's bedside drawer, a torn piece of a handwritten note. The note was crumpled and shoved to the back, as if someone had tried to dispose of it in haste. The note, though incomplete, contained a few lines that caught the detective's attention. The handwriting matched Edie's, and the content hinted at a heated argument. The remaining legible words included Rick, betrayal, will, and an expletive. These fragments suggested that Edie might have been in the process of altering her will or had discovered something unsettling about her fiancé, Rick Lasker. The discovery of this note added a new dimension to the investigation, reinforcing suspicions that the motive for Edie's murder was financial. With this new evidence in hand, the police revisited Rick Lasker's financial records and discovered that he had recently made a large purchase, an expensive engagement ring that he had claimed was a gift for Edie. However, the timing of the purchase was suspicious. Rick had bought the ring just days before Edie's death, despite his well-known financial troubles. This raised the question, was Rick trying to appease Edie, or was it part of a larger plan to manipulate her before her death? The detectives also decided to send the torn note to the lab for further analysis. They wanted to see if they could recover any additional writing on the missing portion, which could provide more insight into Edie's state of mind or her intentions regarding her will. Additionally, they requested a forensic examination of the handwriting to confirm that the note was indeed written by Edie and not forged by someone else. The discovery of the note and the questionable ring purchase put Rick back under intense scrutiny. The police were now more convinced than ever that Rick had something to hide. They increased their surveillance on him, hoping to catch any slip-up that might lead to a confession or more concrete evidence. As the investigation deepened, the police continued to piece together the puzzle, knowing that time was running out to solve the case before it grew cold. The torn note and the engagement ring were pivotal in pushing the investigation forward, but the detectives knew they still needed more to definitively connect Rick to Edie's murder. On the evening of January 30, 2013, as Boynton Beach residents bundled up against the unseasonably cold weather, the police made a crucial breakthrough in the case. After weeks of intense investigation, they had finally gathered enough evidence to identify Edith Edie Palmer Delamere's murderer, her own daughter, Leila Palmer Delamere. Leila, a 34-year-old woman with a troubled past, had always lived in the shadow of her flamboyant and domineering mother. The investigation revealed that Leila had been struggling with deep-seated resentment toward Edie for years. But it wasn't until she discovered her boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, was cheating on her with her own mother that her jealousy and rage reached a fatal boiling point. The police uncovered that Leila had purchased a .38 caliber revolver just days before her mother's death. This fact, combined with the forensic evidence, ballistic tests that matched the bullets found at the crime scene to the revolver, provided the police with the critical link they needed. Furthermore, detectives found Leila's fingerprints on the ballpoint pen used to mutilate Edie's eyes, a detail that revealed the deep hatred she harbored. On the night of Edie's murder, Layla confronted her mother about the affair. Enraged and feeling utterly betrayed, she shot Edie while she was naked in bed, then proceeded to desecrate her body in a fit of blind fury. Her motive was clear. Layla wanted to punish her mother for the ultimate betrayal and eliminate the woman who had overshadowed her entire life. The police arrested Layla at her modest apartment in West Palm Beach. When the officers arrived, she was calm, almost resigned, as if she had been expecting them. She offered no resistance and simply stated, "You bleeping got me." Her reaction was devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the viciousness of her crime. Layla's arrest sent shockwaves through the local community. Edie's fiancé, Rick Lasker, who had initially been under suspicion, expressed his relief but was devastated by the betrayal within the family. Friends and neighbors of Edie, who had once admired her for her larger-than-life personality, were stunned to learn that her own daughter was behind the brutal killing. As Layla was led away in handcuffs, the case that had gripped Boynton Beach was one step closer to being resolved. But for those who knew Edie, the tragedy of her murder at the hands of her own flesh and blood would leave a lasting scar on the community. Layla Palmer Delamere's trial for the murder of her mother, Edith Edie Palmer Delamere, began on July 15, 2013, at the Palm Beach County Courthouse. The trial quickly became the talk of Boynton Beach, with locals following the proceedings closely, eager to see justice served. The prosecution was led by Assistant State Attorney Jennifer Wright-Ponzar, a seasoned prosecutor known for her tough, no-nonsense approach in the courtroom. Wright-Ponzar argued that Layla had coldly and deliberately planned her mother's murder out of deep-seated jealousy and anger. She highlighted the evidence, including the revolver Layla had purchased and the forensic proof linking her to the crime. Wright emphasized how Layla's resentment had been festering for years, culminating in this tragic act of violence. On the other side, Layla's defense attorney, Paul Adams, a well-known public defender in South Florida, painted a different picture. He argued that Layla's mental state had been severely compromised at the time of the murder, driven by years of emotional abuse and manipulation by her mother. Adams suggested that Layla was pushed to the brink, acting in a moment of uncontrollable rage rather than premeditated malice. He called expert witnesses to testify about Layla's history of depression and anxiety, which had worsened after discovering her boyfriend's affair with Edie. Throughout the trial, Edie's friends and former acquaintances filled the courtroom, watching with a mix of sorrow and disbelief. Some had known Edie as a vibrant, if sometimes difficult, personality, and they struggled to reconcile the image of the glamorous socialite with the brutal crime. On August 2, 2013, after just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Layla to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Layla remained expressionless, while her former boyfriend, Jake DeCastro, who had testified during the trial, looked on with visible relief. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the case, but opinions were divided. Some in Boynton Beach felt that justice had been served, while others believed that Layla's life sentence was too harsh, given the circumstances of her mental health and the toxic relationship with her mother. For Edie's friends and family, the trial's outcome was bittersweet, a reminder of the deep wounds left by the crime. After the trial, life in Boynton Beach slowly returned to normal, but the shadows of Edith Edie Palmer Delamere's murder lingered. Layla Palmer Delamere began serving her life sentence at the Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Reports indicated that Layla struggled to adjust to prison life, grappling with depression and isolation. Despite her legal team's efforts to appeal the sentence, there was little hope for Layla's release. Jake DeCastro, Layla's former boyfriend, tried to move on with his life. He left Boynton Beach and returned to Argentina, where he started over, away from the scandal that had consumed his life in Florida. In Argentina, Jake kept a low profile, working various odd jobs to make ends meet, far from the wealth and comfort he had sought during his affair with Edie. Rick Lasker, Edie's former fiancé, also tried to rebuild his life. The death of Edie and the subsequent trial had left him financially drained, and he was forced to sell the lavish Boynton Beach home they had planned to share. He moved to a smaller condo in Delray Beach, where he lived a quieter, more subdued life. Rick distanced himself from the social scene that he and Edie had once dominated, becoming something of a recluse. For Edie's friends and acquaintances, the glamorous parties and social gatherings of the past were a distant memory. Her death had cast a long shadow over Boynton Beach's elite circles, and many who had once been close to her found themselves reevaluating their own lives and relationships, seeking to avoid the kind of tragic ending that had befallen Edie and Leah. Leah Brewster was a 40-year-old woman known for her creative talents and big heart. She lived in a cozy house in a friendly neighborhood in Austin, Texas. Leah worked as an interior designer, using her keen eye for detail to transform homes and businesses into beautiful spaces. She had a degree in interior design from the University of Texas at Austin, where she was an active member of the Student Art Society. Leah was not just talented, she was also very caring. She often volunteered at local shelters like the Austin Animal Center and organized community events. For instance, she was a key figure in setting up the annual spring fair at the local park, where families enjoyed food, games, and live music. Her friends described her as the heart of their group, always the one to plan get-togethers and make everyone feel welcome. She had a close-knit group of friends who often met up for brunch at popular spots like Kirby Lane Cafe. At home, Leah was the glue that held her family together. She was married to Bobby Dean Brewster, an accountant, and they had an 18-year-old son named Caleb. Leah and Caleb were particularly close, often spending weekends together hiking in the Barton Creek Greenbelt or watching Marvel movies. In the days before her death, Leah was very busy but also very excited. She was planning a big community fundraiser for the local homeless shelter. She spent hours designing posters and flyers, and she even managed to get a local radio station, QDX, to promote the event. Leah also had dreams of expanding her interior design business. She was in talks with a local magazine, Austin Monthly, to feature some of her work. Her future seemed bright, and she was looking forward to all the possibilities. Leah's personality was warm and generous. She was the type of person who would go out of her way to help a friend in need or to make a stranger feel welcome. Her friends and family knew her as a selfless, loving person who always put others first. But her tragic death would leave a deep void in the hearts of those who knew her. On the morning of March 12, 2018, the usually quiet neighborhood in Austin, Texas, was shattered by a gruesome discovery. At around 8:30 a.m., Leah Brewster's neighbor, Liesl Gonzalez Chan, decided to drop off some homemade tamales. Liesl and Leah often exchanged baked goods and shared morning coffee. As Liesl approached Leah's front door, she noticed it was slightly ajar. Thinking nothing of it, she knocked and called out Leah's name, but got no response. Concerned, Liesl stepped inside. She walked through the hallway, calling for Leah. As she entered the kitchen, she was met with a horrifying sight. Leah was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, motionless. The kitchen, usually spotless and filled with the smell of Leah's cooking, was in complete disarray. Liesl froze in shock, her mind struggling to process the scene in front of her. After a few moments, Liesl snapped out of her daze and fumbled for her phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. The operator, sensing her distress, tried to calm her down and asked her to describe what she saw. Liesl's voice shook as she explained that her friend was lying on the kitchen floor and wasn't moving. The operator assured her that help was on the way and instructed her to wait outside until the police arrived. Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the air, and 2 police cars pulled up to the house. Officers quickly secured the area and entered the home. Liesl, still in a state of shock, was gently led away by a kind officer who asked her to sit down and take deep breaths. She was offered a blanket and a bottle of water as she tried to calm down. As news of the discovery spread, neighbors gathered outside, whispering and speculating about what had happened. The local news station, KXAN, soon arrived, and reporters began setting up their cameras. The neighborhood was buzzing with fear and curiosity, as everyone wondered how such a tragedy could occur in their peaceful community. Leah Brewster's body was carefully examined by the first responders. They confirmed she had been stabbed multiple times with a kitchen knife, which lay beside her. The brutality of the crime shocked everyone present. Liesl, still trying to comprehend the horror she had witnessed, provided a statement to the police. She described Leah as a wonderful person and expressed her disbelief that something so terrible could happen to someone so kind and loving. In the following hours, forensic teams arrived to start their investigation, marking the beginning of a long and complex case that would uncover dark secrets and hidden motives. The police arrived quickly at Leah Brewster's house on the morning of March 12, 2018, after Liesl Gonzalez Chan's frantic 911 call. Officers Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera were the first on the scene. Arriving within minutes, they were experienced detectives with the Austin Police Department, known for their dedication and sharp investigative skills. As the officers entered the house, they were struck by the chaotic scene in the kitchen. The normally tidy room was in complete disarray, with broken dishes on the floor and blood splattered across the counters and walls. Leah Brewster lay on the kitchen floor in a pool of blood, with a kitchen knife nearby. It was clear that she had been stabbed multiple times, and the brutality of the attack was evident. Detective Costella, a tall man with a stern expression, immediately began assessing the scene, while Detective Rivera, known for her keen attention to detail, started documenting everything with her camera. They carefully examined the area around Leah's body, noting the signs of a struggle. The kitchen table was overturned, and a chair was broken, indicating that Leah had fought hard against her attacker. The detectives called in the forensic team, who arrived shortly after. The team used advanced tools to gather evidence, including swabs for DNA, fingerprint dusting kits, and high-resolution cameras to capture every detail. They meticulously collected samples of blood and other potential evidence, hoping to find clues that would lead them to the murderer. Detective Rivera noticed a set of muddy footprints leading from the back door into the kitchen. She pointed this out to the forensic team, who took detailed photographs and measurements. The footprints suggested that the killer had entered the house through the back, possibly trying to avoid detection. Detectives Costella and Rivera continued to work late into the night, reviewing the evidence and planning their next steps. They knew that solving Leah's murder would require thorough investigation and attention to every detail. The scene in Leah Brewster's kitchen was a puzzle they were determined to solve, piece by piece, to bring justice for Leah and her grieving family. The first suspect in the investigation was Caleb Brewster, Leah and Bobby Dean's 18-year-old son. Caleb was a high school senior with a bright future ahead of him. He was a popular student at Austin High School, known for his talent in basketball and his ambition to study engineering in college. His teachers spoke highly of his intelligence and dedication, and he had already received several scholarship offers. Caleb had a complicated relationship with his father but was very close to his mother. Leah was his biggest supporter, attending all his basketball games and helping him with college applications. However, there was a secret Caleb had been hiding. He was involved in a sexual relationship with his high school English teacher, Laura McMasters. Leah had just recently discovered this relationship before her death, which caused tension in the household. When detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera brought Caleb in for questioning, he appeared nervous but cooperative. He admitted to the relationship with Laura McMasters, explaining that they had grown close over the past year. He described Laura as supportive and understanding, someone he could confide in about his struggles at home and school. The detectives asked Caleb about the night of his mother's murder. He claimed he was at a friend's house studying for an upcoming exam. His friend, Jason Kim, confirmed Caleb's alibi, saying they had been working on a physics project together until late in the evening. However, the detectives were not entirely convinced and continued to press Caleb for more details. Caleb's nervousness grew as the interrogation continued. Detective Rivera, known for her empathetic approach, asked Caleb about his feelings towards his parents, especially after Leah discovered his sexual relationship with Laura. Caleb admitted that his mother's reaction had been harsh, and they had argued about it. He felt guilty for causing his mother distress, but insisted he had no reason to harm her. The police found explicit text messages on Caleb's phone between him and Laura McMasters, discussing their sexual relationship and Leah's disapproval. The messages revealed a deep bond between them and their fears about the future. Caleb expressed his frustration with his parents, but never hinted at any violent intentions. Despite his alibi, the police considered Caleb a person of interest. His sexual relationship with Laura McMasters and the tension at home provided potential motives. The detectives decided to keep a close eye on Caleb, reviewing his social media and phone records for any additional clues. Caleb's friends and teachers were shocked to hear about the investigation. They described him as a bright, ambitious young man with a promising future. The community couldn't believe that someone like Caleb could be involved in such a tragic event. The detectives, however, knew that appearances could be deceiving and continued to scrutinize every aspect of Caleb's life for answers. The second suspect in Leah Brewster's murder investigation was her husband, Bobby Dean Brewster. At 45 years old, Bobby Dean was known for his meticulous and highly organized nature. He worked as an accountant at a well-known local firm, and his colleagues described him as dependable but somewhat reserved. Bobby Dean was perceived as a dedicated family man, though his quiet demeanor often made him seem distant. During the interrogation, Bobby Dean was initially calm and cooperative. He provided a detailed account of his activities on the night of Leah's murder. He claimed he had been at home, watching a basketball game on ESPN and then going to bed early. However, his calmness began to waver as detectives pressed him on his relationship with Leah. The detectives, Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera, noticed signs of strain in Bobby Dean's demeanor when they mentioned Leah's recent discovery of Caleb's secret relationship with his high school English teacher, Laura McMasters. Bobby Dean shifted in his seat, and his responses became more defensive. He admitted that the news had caused tension in the family, but he insisted that he had nothing to do with Leah's death. As the questioning continued, it was revealed that Leah had also discovered something else that could serve as a motive. Leah had found out about Bobby Dean's own affair with Laura McMasters. This revelation had caused a significant rift between Leah and Bobby Dean. Leah's diary entries, which the police found, detailed her heartbreak and anger over her husband's betrayal. Bobby Dean's short temper was another point of interest for the investigators. Friends and family members noted that while he was usually composed, he could become very angry when provoked. Detectives Costella and Rivera questioned Bobby Dean about his temper and whether it had ever led to violence. Bobby Dean denied ever hurting Leah, but the detectives were not convinced. To gather more information, the police interviewed Bobby Dean's co-workers and neighbors. They described him as a man who kept to himself and rarely socialized. Some co-workers mentioned noticing changes in his behavior in the weeks leading up to Leah's murder. He seemed more stressed and distracted at work, often making mistakes in his otherwise flawless accounting records. Despite Bobby Dean's insistence on his innocence, the detectives felt they had enough reason to keep him under close watch. They continued to dig into his background, looking for any additional evidence that could link him to the crime. As the investigation unfolded, Bobby Dean remained a key suspect, his calm exterior masking the potential for deeper, darker motives. The police's thorough interrogation and evidence-gathering process aimed to uncover the truth behind Leah Brewster's tragic death, and Bobby Dean's actions and responses during the investigation only intensified their suspicions. The third suspect in the investigation was Laura McMasters, a 55-year-old high school English teacher at Caleb's High School. Laura was well-liked by her students and colleagues, known for her passion for literature and her dedication to helping students succeed. She often stayed late to assist with assignments and had a reputation for being empathetic and approachable. Laura's involvement with Caleb Brewster came to light during the investigation. The relationship was quite the scandal given their age difference and her position as his teacher. Detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera brought Laura in for questioning at the Austin Police Department. Laura arrived looking composed but clearly nervous about the situation. During the interrogation, Laura admitted to the sexual relationship with Caleb. She explained that it had started innocently, with her offering extra help after school, but had quickly developed into something sexual. Laura described her connection with Caleb as, quote, beautiful, stating that she cared deeply for him and wanted to support him through his family struggles. The detectives pressed Laura about her whereabouts on the night of Leah Brewster's murder. Laura claims she was at home grading papers and preparing lesson plans for the upcoming week. She had no alibi as she lived alone, and there were no witnesses to corroborate her story. This raised suspicions, and the detectives continued to probe. Laura's phone records showed numerous sexually explicit texts and naked pictures exchanged between her and Caleb, especially in the days leading up to Leah's death. The messages revealed their concerns about Leah discovering their relationship and the potential consequences. However, there was no direct evidence linking Laura to the murder. Detective Rivera, using her empathetic approach, asked Laura about her feelings towards Leah. Laura admitted that Leah's discovery of the relationship had caused significant tension. Leah had confronted Laura in her classroom, demanding she end the relationship with Caleb immediately. Laura described the confrontation as heated but insisted she had no intention of harming Leah or of ending the relationship. Despite her calm demeanor, the detectives sensed that Laura was hiding something. They searched her home, looking for any evidence that might connect her to the crime. They found nothing incriminating, but Laura remained a key suspect due to her close involvement with Caleb and the conflict with Leah. Laura's colleagues were shocked by the news. They described her as a dedicated and caring teacher, someone who went above and beyond for her students. The revelation of her sexual relationship with Caleb was hard for them to believe, and the idea that she could be involved in Leah's murder was even more difficult to grasp. As the investigation continued, Laura's life was turned upside down. The scrutiny from the police, the media, and the community weighed heavily on her. She maintained her innocence, cooperating with the authorities while trying to navigate the fallout from the scandal. The detectives kept Laura under close observation, searching for any slip-up or new evidence that could shed light on Leah Brewster's tragic death. On the afternoon of March 16, 2018, a breakthrough in the case came when new evidence was discovered. It was a warm, sunny day in Austin, and the police received a call from a local gardener who had been working in a nearby park, Zilker Metropolitan Park, when he stumbled upon a blood-stained glove hidden behind some bushes near the park's edge. He immediately contacted the Austin Police Department, and officers arrived at the scene within minutes. Detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera, who were leading the investigation, rushed to the park. They carefully retrieved the glove, making sure not to contaminate any potential evidence. The glove was sent to the forensic lab for analysis, and the area around the park was thoroughly searched for additional clues. The forensic team worked quickly, and the results came back later that evening. The blood on the glove matched Leah Brewster's, and there were traces of another substance inside the glove that could be DNA from the suspect. This discovery gave the detectives a renewed sense of urgency. They now had a tangible piece of evidence that could potentially link someone to the crime scene. Detective Rivera reviewed surveillance footage from around the park, hoping to spot anyone who might have been acting suspiciously on the day of Leah's murder. The footage revealed a figure wearing a dark hoodie, walking hurriedly away from the park around the time the murder was believed to have occurred. The person's face was not clearly visible, but the footage provided a lead. Further analysis of the glove's DNA revealed it matched Bobby Dean Brewster. The detectives were now more convinced than ever that he was involved in his wife's murder. They decided to bring him in for further questioning, armed with this new piece of evidence. During the second interrogation, Bobby Dean's calm demeanor began to crack. When confronted with the DNA evidence, he became defensive and evasive. He couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation for how his DNA ended up in a blood-stained glove found near the crime scene. The detectives pressed him harder, and his story started to fall apart. Meanwhile, the forensic team continued to search for additional evidence. They discovered a partial fingerprint on the handle of the kitchen knife used in the murder. This fingerprint also matched Bobby Dean's, strengthening the case against him. The discovery of the glove and the matching DNA and fingerprint evidence were pivotal in the investigation. The detectives now had enough to move forward with their case against Bobby Dean. They continued to gather more evidence, preparing to make an arrest and bring justice for Leah Brewster. The new evidence brought a sense of relief to the community, who had been on edge since Leah's tragic death. It also gave Leah's family hope that the person responsible for her murder would finally be held accountable. On March 18, 2018, armed with crucial evidence, the police were ready to make their move. Bobby Dean Brewster, 45, an accountant by profession, had become their primary suspect. Known for his meticulous and organized nature, Bobby Dean's life seemed orderly from the outside, but inside he was battling jealousy and rage. The investigation revealed that Bobby Dean had discovered his son Caleb's secret relationship with Laura McMasters, the English teacher. This revelation angered him, but what infuriated him more was Leah's discovery of his own affair with Laura. Driven by jealousy and rage, Bobby Dean had initially planned to confront Caleb, his love rival. However, when Leah entered the room where he was waiting, his anger redirected toward her. In a moment of uncontrollable rage, he grabbed the kitchen knife and stabbed Leah to death. Detectives Joseph Costella and Ithiel Rivera, who had been leading the investigation, arrived at Bobby Dean's office early that morning. They had an arrest warrant and the evidence needed to take him into custody. Bobby Dean was taken by surprise as the detectives entered his office and informed him of the charges. His calm exterior shattered, and he became visibly agitated. Bobby Dean was handcuffed and escorted out of his office, past shocked colleagues. His arrest made headlines, with local news stations covering the story. The community was stunned, and the news spread quickly through social media. Leah's family had mixed emotions about Bobby Dean's arrest. They were relieved that the person responsible for Leah's death was caught, but they were also devastated that it was someone so close to them. Leah's sister, Samantha, expressed her sorrow and anger in an interview, stating that she felt betrayed by Bobby Dean, whom she had trusted. As Bobby Dean was led away by the police, his reaction was a mix of shock and resignation. He didn't resist the arrest, knowing the weight of the evidence against him. The detectives took him to the Austin Police Department for booking, where he was processed and placed in a holding cell. The evidence, including the blood-stained glove with Bobby Dean's DNA, the surveillance footage, and the partial fingerprint on the knife, were crucial in solving the case. The detectives' relentless pursuit of justice ensured that Leah Brewster's killer was held accountable. The arrest marked a significant step towards justice for Leah's family, providing them with some solace amid their grief. The community rallied around them, offering support and condolences as they began to process the tragic events. The trial of Bobby Dean Brewster began on July 10, 2018, at the Travis County Courthouse. The courtroom was packed with reporters from KVUE, the Austin American-Statesman, and other media outlets. The community watched closely as the proceedings unfolded. The prosecution was led by District Attorney Sarah Byneding, a 42-year-old with a reputation for being tough and tenacious. Byneding laid out the case against Bobby Dean with meticulous detail. She presented the blood-stained glove, the partial fingerprint on the knife, and the DNA evidence linking Bobby Dean to the crime. She argued that Bobby Dean's jealousy and rage led him to murder his wife, Leah Brewster, in a fit of uncontrolled anger. On the defense side was attorney Michael Grove Basado, a 50-year-old known for his calm demeanor and persuasive arguments. Grove Basado contended that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no clear motive for Bobby Dean to kill his wife. He tried to cast doubt on the reliability of the forensic evidence and suggested that someone else could have been responsible for Leah's death. Throughout the trial, Leah's family sat in the front row, their faces a mixture of sadness and determination. Her sister often wiped away tears as she listened to the testimonies and evidence presented. The community's support was palpable, with many residents showing up to the courthouse to stand by Leah's family. Caleb Brewster, now a college freshman, also attended the trial. He had to relive the painful memories of his mother's death and the shocking revelation of his father's affair with his teacher, Laura McMasters. Laura herself testified, admitting to the relationship with both Bobby Dean and Caleb, but maintaining her innocence regarding the murder. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On July 25, 2018, they returned with a verdict. Bobby Dean Brewster was found guilty of second-degree murder.
The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict. Bobby Dean showed little emotion, staring straight ahead as his fate was sealed. The sentencing took place on August 1, 2018. The judge sentenced Bobby Dean to just 15 years in prison. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Leah's family felt some relief that justice had been served, but the pain of losing Leah was still raw. Samantha expressed her hope that Bobby Dean would reflect on his actions and the damage he had caused. The community had a similar response. Some felt the sentence was too lenient, given the brutal nature of the crime. Others believed it was fair, considering Bobby Dean's previously clean record and the complex emotions involved. Bobby Dean's conviction and sentencing marked the end of a painful chapter for Leah's family and the Austin community. The trial had exposed deep wounds and secrets, but it also brought a measure of justice for Leah Brewster's untimely death. The family and community now faced the challenge of healing and moving forward from this tragedy. After the trial, life in Austin slowly returned to normal, but the impact of Leah Brewster's murder lingered. Leah's family, particularly her sister Samantha, faced the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. Samantha became a vocal advocate for domestic violence awareness, partnering with local organizations like Safe Austin to educate others and provide support to victims. Caleb Brewster, deeply affected by the loss of his mother and the scandal surrounding his father's actions, struggled to find his footing. He decided to transfer to a college out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the painful memories. Caleb focused on his studies in basketball, finding solace in the sport his mother had always supported him in. Laura McMasters continued her teaching position at Austin High School despite the scandal tarnishing her reputation. She faced harsh judgment from the community. In fact, Laura won an award in 2020 for the success in teaching students during the COVID-19 pandemic. Despite her success as a teacher, the stigma of the affair and her involvement in the case continued to follow her. The Brewster home, once a symbol of the happy family, stood empty for several months before being sold. The new owners, aware of the tragic history, sought to bring new life to the house. They renovated and invited the community to a housewarming, symbolizing a fresh start and the healing power of community support. Bobby Dean Brewster, now serving his sentence, had time to reflect on his actions. The prison system offered counseling and rehabilitation programs, which he participated in, hoping to understand and atone for his crimes. His relationship with Caleb remained strained, but there was hope that time and reflection might lead to reconciliation. The trial and its aftermath had left an indelible mark on everyone involved.
Leah Brewster's legacy lived on through the positive changes and awareness her tragic death inspired. The community of Austin learned to come together, supporting one another and working towards a future where such tragedies could be prevented.